Years before my life took an unexpected turn, I sought solace in my routine, working on the house, enjoying a beer, and playing hockey with pals. My wife, Joy, and I had a stable life, albeit it was not without its challenges. The first indications of problems were subtle missed calls and late-night explanations. But I rejected them, assuming it was just life's pressures. Joy, S work trips got more frequent over time, and while I didn't notice at first, she grew aloof. I had a gut sensation something was wrong, but dismissed it. Then, on a winter night, everything changed with a phone call. I was watching war movies, as I usually do while Joy is away, this time for a 2-week vacation to Houston. Midway through Band of Brothers, my phone rang. I was expecting to hear my friend Paul's voice, but instead heard a woman's. Detective Phillips of Vale. She informed me that Joy had been in a major accident and was in a hospital in Eagle Valley. I was shocked. Joy was meant to be in Houston on Saturday. I'd seen a marathon of war movies, including The Dirty Dozen, Enemy at the Gates, and Saving Private Ryan, and loaded up on munchies for the weekend. I was unhappy by the interruption and hoped Joy had won a holiday somewhere warm. I would have been content with her simply being in Houston, however. When I saw unknown on the caller ID, I assumed it was Paul and responded with a grumble, but the woman's voice took me by surprise. She stated that my wife had been in an accident, but I insisted she was still in Houston. The investigator questioned when I last spoke with her, and I told her it was the night before, when she read Joy's home address off her ID. I was stunned. Someone must have stolen her pocketbook, I reasoned, assuming I could bring charges. The detective requested me to come to the hospital and check her possessions. Frustrated, I agreed and began my 2-hour drive to Vale. As I drove, my mind raced. I considered the possibilities. Perhaps someone snatched Joy's wallet and went skiing. Perhaps it truly was Joy. But why is she in Vale? My devil's advocate voice questioned me. How do you know she's actually in Houston? I realized I hadn't seen her board the plane. How could I be certain? What if she is cheating? The voice in my head inquired. If this is the case, I will leave her. I believed there was no place for a cheater in my life. I understood that leaving a 10-year marriage was drastic. I was not going to live like my father. When I was 10 years old, I wondered about my parents. My mother began spending more time with friends, and my father became worried. One day, I overheard her admitting to an affair. They attempted to straighten things out, but my father grew domineering, forcing her to quit her job and check in frequently. They eventually split after I graduated, and my father, a former excellent detective, never recovered. I hardly speak to my mother these days, since I believe her actions harmed my father. I vowed myself I wouldn't be like him, or like my brother Daniel, who killed his wife and her boyfriend after catching them together. He is now serving time in prison, so I had to find a middle ground. Handle it if Joy was cheating, but avoid losing myself in the process. If she was unfaithful, I would move on and spend time with my buddies. As I approached the Vale exit, I became increasingly worried, and even my inner voice went silent. I almost pulled over to throw up. I found the hospital easily and parked before walking through the cold to the door. I hadn't drunk anything stronger than beer since my wedding, but I immediately needed a bottle of Jack Daniels at the information desk. I stated why I was there, and they gave me a room number. When I reached the floor, I discovered it was the intensive care unit. I informed the nurse of my identity, and she summoned someone to meet me at the door. Inside, I was greeted by a short blonde nurse whose uniform strained against her chest. "Your wife is sedated," she added softly. I wondered if it was even her, but I remained calm and listened. "She's seriously hurt and may not look like herself. She will not hear you. But I want you to be prepared." I was unsure if I was ready. "I will be all right." I spoke, my voice cracking. "Let me in." What I discovered on the bed surprised me. The woman's chest rose and fell, and though her height and build matched my wife's, I couldn't identify her face. Did she hit every tree on the mountainside? "Oh no," the nurse responded. "She did not ski. This morning someone knocked her up and left her in an ambulance. Get her up. Faithful wives do not end up pulling down an abandoned house." My inner voice agreed, but I didn't know how to respond. "I can't tell whether this is my wife," I told the nurse. "Perhaps this will help." She explained, raising the cover to reveal the woman's left thigh. There it was, the tattoo. I had not seen many women with Jiminy Cricket tattoos on their inner thighs. She acquired it before our wedding and said it represented her parents, Jim and Yvonne, though I never really believed it. Nonetheless, it served as sufficient proof. This was a joyful experience. Seeing Mom laying in that hospital bed was difficult. I'd only seen her in this much anguish once before when I first met her. It was after a friend's tour concert, and I had a case of beer in the van for the after party when a female approached and asked for a beer for her boyfriend, Chad explained. You can remain and have a drink, but we won't give him one. She went, and a few minutes later I heard cries. I hurried over and witnessed someone being knocked down by a small person with a severe case of small man syndrome. He said, "Where is my beer, you witch?" No one assisted her while she was being struck. So I moved in and pulled him away by his collar. He threatened me, but I was not afraid when he tried to touch her again. I knocked him unconscious and took her back to our van, where Chad was waiting with an ice pack. Security picked up the guy, and I wanted to report what happened, but she stopped me and said, "You've done enough. No one has ever stood up to Garrett. He'll probably return to Wyoming immediately." She was stunning, even with her gothic appearance. We took her home from the party. Chad, observing something, commented, "I think she's into you." I brushed it off, but later discovered she had left me a letter with her phone number. Call me Joy. 2 days later, I called her, and she was shocked but delighted to hear from me. We talked for 1 hour. Then she contacted me again that evening, and we spoke until midnight. Our first date was on Friday. We went to a tiny Italian restaurant, then had drinks and danced at a bar. When I took her home, she inquired if I was attempting to get her into bed. I replied that there will be plenty of time for that later. I prefer to wait several dates. It is more intriguing that way. I kissed her cheek and went home, not seeing her again for 3 weeks. I didn't want to acknowledge it, but sleeping with women after the first date usually appeared to go poorly. So I developed paranoia. We talked on the phone whenever we could, but our schedules were rarely compatible. When we finally got a free weekend, her aunt died, and she flew to Florida for the burial. The weekend following her return, we went to the movies. When I picked her up, her father, Jim, met me at the door. He was nice at first, inquiring about my career and history, but then abruptly stated, "You're a much better match for Joy than that loser. Unfortunately, he will not meet me." "He met me," I said. "Hopefully he stays away." Jim agreed, muttering about the guy as Joy appeared, beaming and wearing a dress that perfectly accentuated her shape, making me ponder my 3 dates prior to Zach's rule. We did not sleep together that night, however. She had to work early the next morning and requested me to postpone our plans. The next weekend. I took her out to dinner, but on the way home she developed stomach cramps and needed to use the restroom. My flat was close, so I raced her there after she used the restroom. I didn't anticipate anything to happen, but she strolled out with only red panties and high-heeled boots, instructing me to remove my coat. Needless to say, I took additional time off. We ate breakfast at a neighboring shop the next morning and did not leave until Sunday dinner. As I dropped her off, she moaned about her boss forcing her to work weekends and joked about me being her favorite illegal substance. Later, as I left the hospital, I was handed Joy's personal possessions and told that the police had already gone through them. While I was analyzing this, the nurse's telephone rang. After conversing with someone, she handed me the phone. Detective Phillips asked me to come to the station for questioning. I consented, but I couldn't get rid of the impression that the cop accused me of harming Joy. Why should I? I reasoned, because she's a traitor. I had no strong evidence of her cheating, but her presence in Vail was strange. I attempted to think of a logical explanation. Maybe she won a trip to Vail, flew to Denver, leased a car, and got into trouble before informing me it was all too bizarre. But I didn't have any specific evidence. I arrived at the station as the sun was setting. A brunette Detective Phillips and a tall man, Deputy Devon, approached me. Phillips appeared nice, but Devon glanced at me as if I were guilty of something. "Should I hire a lawyer?" I asked. "Do you believe you need one?" Phillips responded. "No, I have nothing to conceal." Detective Phillips escorted me into a room and beckoned for me to sit. Devon moved in the opposite direction. "I am going to record our chat, Mr. Rigby. Is this okay?" "Fine with me." "Sorry about the pricks thing," I said, attempting to clarify the air. She lifted her eyebrow. Excuse me. When I called you a prick on the phone, I assumed you were my friend, interrupting my dinner. She seemed intrigued. What is my time? When Joy is not in town, I watch World War II movies. She dislikes them. Devon returned and took a seat at that exact moment. Ready? He asked. Phillips pressed a button to record. Detective Desiree Phillips interviews Mr. Roger Rigby in relation with Case 1256G, which involves Joy Tanya Rigby. Mr. Rigby, please include your name, age, and date of birth. My name is Roger Ezekiel Rigby. I'm 35. Born on December 16th. Your address and occupation, 1467 West Danube Avenue, Colorado Springs. I am a bricklayer. Where were you between 6 p.m.? Last night and 8 a.m. How about this morning? Let us see. I was working on a fireplace in Manitou Springs from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., from 7 to 8:30 p.m. I drove back to Jerry's Pub, where I stayed until 11 p.m. I arrived home around 11:30 and remained there till you called. Can someone confirm this? Phillips asked. Blanche. Donovan and Manitou can corroborate that I was working at her place. Paul Hannibal saw me at Jerry's, and Stephen Harper, my neighbor, can attest that I was home at midnight, 3, and 6. How can Stephen confirm this? Devon asked. We both have dogs who need to go out during those times. He's a night owl, so we always cross paths when I walk my dog Dot. The detectives exchanged glances, and Phillips proceeded. When did you last see your wife? Monday a.m. I drove her to the airport so she could fly to Houston. Why did she travel to Houston for her company's annual meeting? Only the best performers advance. And it was her 3rd year. What about your wife? Do? She offers life insurance for TransUnited. You know those awful commercials in which an elderly man tells a child to brace himself for the inevitable? Both detectives nodded. When did you last see her carrying her luggage? Phillips inquired at the airport. I dropped her off before heading into work. Did you eat breakfast together? No, we were heading to, but she forgot her bag, so we had to return home to retrieve it. How did she forget her luggage? She assumed I had grabbed it when I warmed up the car, but I didn't realize it was still on the bed until we were close at the airport. Phillips nodded and asked, How often does your wife take business trips? Twice per year. The general meeting will take place over 2 weeks in February, followed by 2 weeks of training in Indianapolis in August. And the general meeting is held in Houston each year. No, it changes. Last year was in Los Angeles, as was the previous year, New York. After consulting with Devon, Phillips inquired, Do you know anyone who might want to harm your wife? Not that I am aware of, with the exception of some of her clientele. Why would they want to hurt her? Well, the company has a questionable sales strategy. People sign up for a free children's information packet, and then my wife distributes it and tries to sell them life insurance. Some folks become quite upset. Have you met with any clients in Vail? I have no idea. She was meant to be in Houston. Do you suppose she might have been with someone in Vail? I sighed and handed the police a list of Joy's colleagues. Some of them might have gone to Houston with her. Perhaps they can explain why she wasn't present. Devon sighed and looked at Phillips, who appeared to be satisfied for the time being. Mr. Rigby, you can leave. Are you going home tonight? Phillips asked. No, I'll find a motel after their typical hours. We will be in touch. I exited the station. While driving back to the hospital, I realized I had more questions than answers. Was Joy playing me? Less than 1 week ago? I dropped her off at the airport for her flight to Houston, and she was now in a hospital in Vail. At the hospital, I was told that visiting hours had ended and I could return at 7 a.m. I asked the guard for hotel ideas, and he made a joke about Vail during ski season. Cheap means living with relatives. I laughed pleasantly and walked to my car, realizing that I still had Joy's possessions. I reviewed the inventory list but couldn't find what I was looking for. One among the items not returned was a prescription bottle of Percocet that Joy had left over from dental operations. Why was she still carrying the pills? Then I spotted her boots. Joy would always accompany them on their travels, and I remembered that Mom used to keep a key card inside. Sure enough, I found one, but it was entirely blank. There are no logos or identifying markers. I now have the key to her room. But where is her phone? It didn't appear in the inventory or her purse. That was a good sign, I thought. My neighbor Stephen created a phone monitoring app because his partner kept losing his phone. Joy had lost hers before, so I had the program installed on her phone as well. I opened the app, entered her number, and realized I was 4 kilometers away from her phone. I started my car and followed the directions up the mountain. Arriving at a ski area with expensive lodges, I parked Joy's BMW amid the Lexus and Audis and made my way to one of the lodges. The app said that Joy's phone was in room 114. I tried the key card. Nothing. I climbed the steps and attempted 214, then 314. The key card finally worked. What happens now? I wondered if I should confront whoever was inside or call the cops. I listened at the door but did not hear anything. After a brief moment of hesitation, I swiped the key card and opened the door. The only light in the room came from the hallway behind me. I stepped inside and turned on the light. The place felt wrong to tidy, as if someone tried to make it appear undisturbed. The bed had been made, but the quilt hung unevenly. Joy's bag rested on the bed, carefully packed. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, while her laptop was on a little table near the window. This seemed staged, I thought Dot. It didn't appear that someone had slept here, but it wasn't professionally cleaned either. I decided to look more closely. I went into the bathroom and spotted a few damp spots on the sink, as if someone attempted to clean up without utilizing appropriate cleaning products. The soap was in the shower, and while the towels were nicely placed, they were damp at the bottom dot. Someone has attempted to hide their tracks, but not successfully. I returned to the bed and pulled back the blanket. The sheets were ruffled, indicating that someone had slept there, but there were no traces of violence. There is no blood or tears in the fabric. What exactly happened here? I wondered. I sat down at the table and grabbed up Joy's phone. She never used passwords. Therefore, I was able to access it effortlessly. As her laptop booted, I called my sister Beth and asked her to look after my dog. Then I made the difficult call to my father-in-law, Jim, and explained what I knew. I hope this is simply a misunderstanding, I said, trying to remain cool. Jim sighed. Please call me when you have more information. Next, I called my detective cousin Hugh and requested that he contact the Vale Police Department. He agreed to keep me updated. I took one final step and called the lodge, asking for Joy Rigby or Joey McIntyre. No one with those names was registered. Joy's laptop had already booted up, but her browser history and emails had been deleted. She'd never deleted anything, so this was unusual. I checked her phone. Her text messages were also deleted. I thought someone was covering their tracks. I opened her suitcase and discovered 1 business suit, 3 cocktail dresses, and an abundance of lingerie. This is not a business trip. Wardrobe. I realized I knew now. Divorce was likely. The next morning after a quick shower, I left the room with Joy's phone and laptop, but not her suitcase. I'd spent the night in a chair next to the table, unable to sleep in the bed. After coffee, I called Detective Phillips to report the key card I had discovered. She agreed to meet me in half an hour. After driving around Vale for a while, I met Phillips at the police station. She greeted me and escorted me to her office, where I handed over the key card. You seem like a man whose world has crumbled, she added gently. I believe I will lose my wife over this, I said. I'd like to hear her explanation, but I doubt I can believe it. Don't give up hope yet, she said, though her expression suggested otherwise. I thanked her and went to the hospital, where I was permitted to see Joy for 15 minutes every 2 hours for one visit. I looked at her, hoping she would awaken and explain everything. Dr. Benson had just arrived to see me. He indicated that Joy was recuperating, but suggested she be transferred to Denver for further rehabilitation. He referenced her head injury and possibly brain damage, but I couldn't get over the ambiguity of what had happened. I signed the transfer papers for Joy and asked if I could finish the rest at St. Luke's on my way home. Where is your home? The doctor inquired. Colorado Springs? I responded. He appeared anxious and placed a call. He returned just a few minutes later. The plan has changed, he stated. We will move her to St. Augustine's in Colorado Springs. It is equally as wonderful and will be more convenient for your family to visit. I signed fresh papers, paid my last visit to Joy, and left the hospital in tears. I believed it was customary to cry in a hospital. People would stare wherever they were. On the way out of Vale, I called Jim to update him. When I drove home, I noticed my sister Beth's Jeep in the driveway and felt comforted. Piper, my Doberman, greeted me at the door, and Beth was there waiting. She looked at me and knew something was amiss. I held her, told her I loved her, and everything just spilled out. I burst into tears because my marriage had ended. Beth stayed with me late at night, trying to get me to eat, but I wasn't hungry. I still had to tell Jim everything, so she came with me. After I finished speaking to Jim and Yvonne, I saw a change in Jim's expression. It was no longer certain that Joy had not mistreated me. He had worn that identical expression before, during a rough time in our relationship. We had been dating for a few months when Joy abruptly canceled our weekend plans. I was annoyed, but I accepted it. Then I heard Jim yelling in the background, "Tell that witch's son to come meet me." Worried, I drove over. Jim greeted me at the entrance, furious. "You're just as bad as that other guy. If you're going to hurt my daughter, come after me." Shocked, I responded. "Did you hurt your daughter? What exactly are you talking about?" Joy and Yvonne came outside, and I noticed Joy had a black eye. "What happened?" I asked. Jim shouted, "You strike her!" I was surprised, but Joy soon interfered. "He did not touch me, Daddy." I had supper with Garrett, and we argued. I went away too angry and hurt to stay. Jim tried to apologize, but I told Joy we were finished. I drove aimlessly till I arrived near Garrett's apartment. I punched him in the face after knocking on his door and seeing him open it with a smug look. I continued striking him until he stopped moving, then kicked him a few more times for good measure. I observed some moving crates in his trailer. I asked, "Are you moving?" He groaned, and I kicked him one final time. "Enjoy your journey," I said before leaving. When I arrived home, I iced my knuckles. The phone rang, and I answered without first checking the caller ID. Joy pleaded, "Roger, please." I hung up before she could finish. The phone called again nearly immediately, and this time I verified the ID. It was a joyful experience. I left it ringing for the next hour. The phone rang on and off until it eventually stopped. 10 minutes later, it restarted. Annoyed, I checked, expecting excitement, but it was my cousin Hugh Hazik. He claimed he was the only one who addressed me by my middle name, a family nickname. "What's up, Hugh? Just a heads up. CCPD received a call concerning Garrett Jimenez being in poor health. He informed the cops that a huge person kicked his bum. You wouldn't know about it, would you?" I laughed. "Nope, no idea. But thank you for the warning. Be careful, Zeke. If someone connects you to this, things might become messy." Not long after, the police arrived at my door, but I was prepared. I had my hockey gear set out, and the scratches on my knuckles appeared to be the product of a difficult game. I told the officer I'd been practicing, and because I played on a police-sponsored team, he seemed pleased. On Saturday, I skated hard to prepare for the next season. When I went home, I found several messages pinned to my door, most of them from Joy, but one was from Jim, who apologized for thinking the worst and asked me not to hold it against Joy. I called Jim and reassured him, "It's okay. You reacted like any father would. It is not your fault, Joe. I did not tell you the truth." "Thank you, son. Would you like to talk to Joy?" I could hear her pleading in the background, but I responded forcefully, "No, Jim. She knew what Garrett was like, and she let you believe I struck her. She botched our strategy so that I couldn't see her face." "I understand," Jim remarked, disheartened. "I'm sorry, Jim, but I don't have time to cheat ladies. As I finished explaining everything to Jim and Yvonne in the present, I noticed Jim recalling that experience. "I'm delighted they brought her here, son, but I hope you haven't planned anything drastic." "No, sir," I reassured him. "I haven't hired lawyers yet, but Joy has a lot to explain. Whatever happens, Roger, Yvonne, and I still consider you family. I hope you do not cut us out of your life." "I won't, as I promised." Beth questioned on the drive home, "Will you be all right? Do I have a choice?" "I am not curling up and dying. I am sad that this is happening. Is it possible for you to stay together if she cheats?" "No," I replied forcefully. "I am not going to be one of those obsessive spouses that monitors his wife's every movement." Beth sighed. "Mom asked about you. She loves you. Perhaps you should talk to her." I shook my head so she could tell me that infidelity is common. No thanks. Beth was quite protective of her mother, especially after our brother Daniel went to prison. She had invited me to return, but after one visit in which Mom supported Daniel's choices, I departed. I was not going to accept someone telling me that cheating was acceptable. I simply do not want you to make a decision that you will later regret. Beth spoke gently. "Do not worry. I'll make sure I have the answers first." After Beth drove me off, I went to Stephen and Joe's apartment. As I met up with Stephen Joy, I handed him his laptop. and he immediately began browsing it. He requested if he might keep it for a day or two to investigate more. I didn't mind Joe's attempt to lighten the mood, joking, "I could connect you with my cousin if you wish." I laughed. "Unless she has C-cups and a shaved pubic area, I am not interested." Joe ridiculed Prude, but I could tell he was only trying to make me laugh. I sat with Joe and drank a beer while Stephen focused on Joy's laptop. Joe gave me a cheeky look as he prepared for bed because he had to get up early. "I'll be dreaming about your sexy, newly single neighbor," he joked. I smiled, Mrs. Jasper. She's been a widow forever. Joe laughed, bid me good night, and went upstairs. Stephen remained hooked to the laptop. When I left, I brought Piper outside. We played a little game of tag, but the cold convinced her it was time to return inside after a few throws. I crawled into bed, Piper beside me. Joy had always disliked it when Piper slept on the bed, but I didn't care what she thought anymore. Despite Piper's presence, my disturbed sleep was not completely her fault. The next morning, I drank coffee and read the sports section until 8 a.m. By 9 a.m. I was seated in the office of Joy's employer, Bernie Jag. "What can I do for you, Brian?" Bernie inquired enthusiastically, despite the fact that he consistently mispronounced my name. I ignored it. "Can you explain why my wife would leave the Houston convention and travel to Vail?" Bernie appeared puzzled. "Vail? I did not send her to Houston. That meeting was for new agents, not managing agents like Joy." I sensed irritability mounting. "What about the training meetings in Indianapolis? They're barely a few days long. We depart on Sunday and will return on Thursday." Something clicked, and I inquired whether she had been taking 2 weeks off and staying somewhere else. Bernie appeared uncomfortable. "Roger, people make decisions that are difficult to explain. I apologize if this news has hurt you." Anger rose within me. "Who was she with?" Bernie hesitated. "Promise me that no one will be wounded." I stared coldly. "Bernie, my wife is in a coma. I will not harm anyone." He groaned and told me the name. My heart fell. That tiny weasel. An hour later, my cousin Hugh called. "How are you doing, Zeke?" "I am all right. What up?" "We discovered who rented the room Joy was staying in. We will invite him in for questioning, and if he refuses, he will be arrested. Can I be present when you question him?" "Jeb has already agreed. I'll call you once it's set up." I spent the next few hours in the hospital meeting with Joy's brain damage specialists. Part of me wanted to abandon her, but I realized I didn't have all the answers yet. Jim and Yvonne arrived 1 hour before Joy's departure from Vail. I told them what I'd learnt. Jim was stunned, and Yvonne implored me to wait before making any final decisions. I vowed I wouldn't hurt Joy, but I wasn't sure whether waiting was the best option. When Jim asked if I could make it through this, I honestly said, "I don't know. I can't trust her anymore. I watched what mistrust did to my father, and I do not want to end up like him." Yvonne responded, "But you've already taken her back." "Yes, but we weren't married at the time, and she didn't lie to me like this." I responded. I didn't feel happy for 3 weeks following my battle with Garrett. Around the middle of the second week, she stopped calling. A week later, after I stopped avoiding phone calls, I discovered we hadn't officially proclaimed our relationship exclusive. She was still seeing Garrett. I didn't call her, and she assumed we were dating, but the fact that she allowed her father believe I touched her was a deal-breaker for me. As I was leaving hockey practice for my apartment, I noticed Joy sitting by the door. "I did not answer your calls." "So you came here?" I asked. "Do you have to be such an asshole? I missed you." "Oh, seriously? Perhaps you missed me when your lover was still in bed. So you're upset at Garrett?" "No, that is not what troubles me. I'm upset you convinced your father that I struck you. I walked in and she followed me. We never pledged to be exclusive, so I can't be furious if you sleep with him, but I'm mad. I did not perceive things clearly earlier. I threw my things aside and continued. We had a fantastic time. However, you tend to love guys who can't control their problems and knock you." "Fine. I am done. Are you done?" she cried as she asked. "Oh, I am done. I just don't understand why you're still here. Listen, I apologize for leading my father to believe you had wounded me. I canceled our date so you wouldn't get into trouble. I forgot my phone at home when I went to see Garrett. You do not owe me an explanation. I am done. No, you should listen. I went to see Garrett because he was relocating to Wyoming. When I refused to accompany him, he knocked me. Julie's I hit it and went home to call you. But my father spotted me first. You know the rest. Okay? I listened. Now I'm waiting for a shower. I'm not sure why, but I asked, "Do you want to join me?" I didn't need to ask twice. That night, we agreed to be exclusive. 3 weeks later, she moved in. 8 months later, we got married. Garrett only came up again when she informed me he died in a vehicle accident in Wyoming, and she attended his funeral. Joy is being transferred to St. Augustine's intensive care unit 10 years later. The doctors believe she has a high chance of recovering. Later, while waiting at the hospital, Hugh texted me that Cal Davis was scheduled for an interview at 4 a.m. I informed Jim and Evan that I had an appointment and left. At home, I dressed in a suit and tie. Hannibal, knowing Sheriff Jebb, would expect me to present myself professionally during the interrogation. When I arrived at the sheriff's office, Hugh greeted me. "Vale Police will join via video. You'll sit out of sight and recall. Do not speak. This could harm the case. I understand. I will not attack him either," I assured him as we entered the building, and I noticed Catherine Shepard, the high school girl who had always seemed out of my league, looking even more beautiful than I recalled. Deputies led her into the room, and Hugh taunted me. "Stop drooling Zeke inside," Sheriff Jebb smiled. I had always wanted to do this. He brought out a badge and deputized me, allowing me to remain in the room as law enforcement. Later, he hugged me. "Your father was an excellent cop, and I am confident you will be one as well. If you ever finish the degree." Hugh and I left Jebb's office. My new badge was on show as my thoughts turned to Catherine Shepard. I knew she was out of my league, but I wondered if she would have cheated like the other women in my family. Maybe that's just how things were for us. Daniel probably agrees. We walked into the room, and Hugh directed me to a chair out of the camera's view. He sat at the table and set up the video conference. Detective Phillips and another officer eventually joined us over speaker. A sheriff's officer brought in a slick-looking man named Cal Davis. He had that salesman smile, even in a room full of cops. I never met him, but I knew about him. Joy's mentor. "Mr. Davis, you started this interview as if it were being recorded. No problem," Cal said firmly. Hugh introduced the team, which included Phillips and Detective Albert from Vale, and asked Cal whether he understood his rights. Cal consented to speak without a lawyer. Cal consented, and the typical queries about his whereabouts began. I instantly understood this wasn't the guy who had injured Joy. He had been sleeping with her, certainly, but he didn't seem like the sort to risk everything by being violent. Then Phillips posed the question I had been waiting for. "Mr. Davis, where were you from Friday to Sunday?" Cal revealed that he had been in Houston for a professional meeting and spent the weekend with his wife. Cal's confidence collapsed when Hugh indicated they'd phone his boss for confirmation, and his tanned complexion paled as he inquired, "Can I tell you something off the record without my wife's knowledge?" Cal quickly confessed to Joy that he had been having an affair with her for 6 years. He was noticeably shaken when he found out she was in the hospital. He stated they went to Denver on Friday, and Joy informed him she had won a trip to Vale. He dropped her off at the airport, and she called me while he was with her. He said he went home, and his wife confirmed it. After a few more questions, he told Cal he may go, but not leave town. Before leaving, Cal asked for a private conversation with me. I consented, and once we were alone, he appeared defeated, unlike the confident man who had strolled in earlier. "Roger, do you know who I am?" he asked. "You obviously know me. Joy has your photograph on her desk and in her presentation kit. You know she loves you." I scoffed. "No, she does not. If she had, we wouldn't be here. But I also love her." Cal sighed. "I adore her, Roger, and my wife. She is aware of my feelings of Joy. It began when I interviewed her for my team. We had chemistry, and one day after a no-show presentation, we had lunch near a military base before making love at a nearby hotel. We both felt bad, but the chemistry was undeniable. It appears that they are not guilty enough to stop," I replied sarcastically. "It was neither cheap nor tasteless, Roger. Joy and I shared something real. Sorry. I didn't mean to belittle your little love story," I teased him. Cal, who was visibly distressed, added, "I understand your anger, but I do not regret embracing delight. Not a bit. I couldn't believe the bullshit Cal was saying. I wanted to punch him, but I refrained. Joy was no longer my concern." "So you don't mind your wife taking off with someone else twice a year?" I asked. No, it's been difficult enough sharing her with you. You can have her now, he replied. Are you telling me to share her? Are you stupid? I didn't even realize I was sharing her. If I had, we would not have been together. Because I do not tolerate cheating. You're correct. That's why you both went on those trips, Mexico City, San Diego, and Rio. I visited Miami Vale, among other places. We had a system for 1 week with each other, followed by 1 week with our spouses. Joy was away for 2 weeks, and I only knew about Miami. So where was she for the remainder of the time? Cal actually began bawling. Did she cheat on me too? Hello, Cal. She is in St. Augustine's Hospital, room 2410. Tell her father I'll be in touch. When I turned to leave, he inquired, You are not going to tell my wife, are you? I do not even know your wife. Why would I injure her? The guilt will eat you alive. Have fun living with it. He waited in the corridor. Sorry, Zeke, I thought we had him. I knew he was not the one who had hurt her. But how did this happen beneath my nose? We just heard a commotion. Cal's wife, Katrina Shepard, slapped him. You are a cheater. Do not come home. As she passed by, she hugged me tightly, sobbing, I'm so sorry, it is not your fault. We just married cheaters. I said. She laughed through the tears. I wiped one away and added, I hope things work out for you. Good luck to you, Roger, she whispered, kissing my cheek before leaving. I glanced at Hugh and told him he already had it at home, but he needed Joy. Some guys simply crave what they cannot have. He responded. We went to Jeb's office, where I returned my badge and received the standard police training lecture. I had heard it all before, but maybe one day I would listen. The following few days were hectic. I spent Tuesday looking for a lawyer to represent me in the divorce. Thankfully, Joy and I did not have children. Piper was mine, and the house belonged to her grandma, so I didn't have to battle over it. My brother and I inherited my father's house, and I was relieved I didn't have to move into a cheap apartment. Joy had been unhappy when I battled to keep the house following Daniel's arrest, but I knew it was worthwhile. Now I was relieved I had it. Late Tuesday, I went to the hospital. Jim was there, and when he saw me, he simply shook his head. How long? He asked. It's been at least 6 years since she started selling insurance. I responded, but there may be more. I can't believe what my daughter did. I am neither. I would not have married her if I knew. I told him everything. Carl confessed. Jim sighed. I've often wondered why she stopped taking pictures throughout her visits. She used to shoot pictures everywhere, including in Denver. Why hadn't I noticed? I didn't either. I told him I wouldn't go to the hospital anymore. I can't speak to her again. Jim understood and asked if I would stay at the house while Joy healed. I agreed, telling him that I would not file for divorce until she was better. I recognized that I would miss him and Yvonne. They treated me like family, and it was not their fault. They raised someone who deceived both of us. On Wednesday, I worked on a chimney repair all day and then went to a hockey game that evening. I played rough, spending much of the first period in the penalty box, followed by another penalty in the second. The coach, a good friend of Paul's, removed me from the game, knowing I was dealing with personal concerns, but did not want me kicked out of the league. When I came home, I was upset about the loss and blamed myself for allowing personal issues to interfere with my performance. My teammates wouldn't let me take the blame, and a few even promised to go after Cal for me, though I may not have stated it well enough. After putting Piper out, I was ready to return inside when Stephen yelled out saying he'd be over shortly. I assumed he had found something on Joy's laptop the previous evening. I had gone through our invoices and statements, but nothing appeared strange. The only weird thing was that Joy was calling her friend Fiona more frequently before her vacations. Usually once a month, but more frequently as the trip got closer. I felt Fiona knew more than I did, but I was unable to contact her when I called. I also regretted not having Joy's phone. Stephen arrived, looking excited. What did you find? I asked. Grab a beer and I will show you, he said. We sat at the pub as he opened Joy's laptop. Whoever deleted the data knew what they were doing. Stephen stated that there are tools available that allow her to use the internet without leaving a trace. Fortunately, I received assistance from a friend in the Department of Defense. Is Joy some sort of computer genius? No, she keeps the same password for everything. Did anyone else set this up? I am thinking. Fiona. Stephen discovered that Joy had secret email addresses and bank accounts. When I informed him about the trips I learned from Cal, his eyes widened. He also uncovered love messages in deleted emails, including several written to Cal. Others, too. Garrett is someone's name. "Son of a witch," I snarled. Stephen demonstrated how to access the hidden bank account, which had over $10,000. I arranged for the monies to be transferred to our joint account while closing the secret account. I also updated all of the contact information so that I could be notified of any action. I later called Detective Phillips, even though it was late. I told her about Joy's bank account and the lost debit card. I also described Garrett and told her where the card had recently been used. "Thanks for the information, she said. "You should consider becoming a cop." I said, "I hear that a lot." We said goodnight, and as I hung up, I envied and pitied her spouse. Being married to a cop was not easy, as I had witnessed with my own parents. The following morning, I brought Piper outdoors and spotted Stephen again. "Hey, Stephen, do you still have access to the DMV databases?" I asked. He always replied with a grin. I gave him a name to look into before saying goodnight and going inside. The next morning, exhausted from the long day, Jim called to inform Joy that the doctor anticipated her to wake up shortly. "Have you considered forgiving her?" he asked. "No," I responded, explaining that I was uncovering more lies. He was upset when I informed him of Joy's affair, but I did not mention the secret financial account. Later, Stephen arrived with some news. "You will not believe this," he continued. He showed me that Joy had not completely lied about attending Garrett's funeral. She had traveled to Laramie for Fiona's burial, Garrett's sister. That's when their affair most likely began. It became worse. Joy invited me to a meeting in Miami that year. Garrett had been jailed for minor stealing. His parole restricted him from leaving Colorado, which explains why their travels grew more limited. I called my lawyer to discuss my plans, and he assured me that they could be handled lawfully. Now all I had to do was wait for Joy to wake up 2 weeks after her coma ended. Joy was questioned by police. I followed Detectives Phillips and Albert down the corridor. Garrett was detained after attempting to intimidate a bank staff into giving him money from Joy Rigby's card. The bank had marked the card as stolen, and security kept him until Denver police came. His parole officer was also curious about why he had left Denver without permission, so he was hauled into custody. When Phillips and Albert entered Joy's room, I remained in the hallway until Hugh persuaded them to allow me listen in. Detective Phillips even inquired whether I had any questions. I had a million, but I decided to let them handle it. As they introduced themselves, Jim inquired whether they wanted the door closed. Phillips stated that they couldn't lock the door because Joy wasn't in custody, but they had put someone outside to prevent eavesdropping. Joy appeared hesitant at first, disputing everything, until they presented her with evidence that the hotel receptionist had seen her, with Carl and Garrett. She eventually admitted to having relationships with both men, but she was mortified to reveal Garrett had hit her. Phillips then played an unexpected card. "Your husband believes you had 2 partners without his knowledge," Phillips said. "What you tell us may help him reconcile with you. There is no prospect of that happening." I assumed Joy admitted to me that she lied to attend Garrett's sister's funeral and that they restarted their relationship that weekend. She claims to still love me, but Garrett recommended they meet discreetly once a month. She did not see how it could harm me, so she agreed. She then described how things began with Carl, stating that she was drawn to the fact that they were both married. They would meet at corporate occasions and have covert rendezvous, and she gave me Miami to alleviate her guilt. Lying again? Any reservations I had about delivering her divorce papers evaporated at that point. When Phillips inquired about the knocking, Joy claimed she enraged Garrett by ceasing her birth control to have children with me. Garrett became enraged when she refused to give him an opportunity to father her kid and attacked her. Her performance, which included tears, was Oscar-worthy. Phillips asked one last question. "Why do you have Jiminy Cricket tattooed on your thigh?" Joy replied. It was Garrett's idea. He stated it would allow him to always be with me without Roger knowing that quote S when I entered the room. She called me baby and began apologizing, but I handed her divorce papers and said there was no need. "You have already been served," I chuckled when she shouted. 5 years later, getting a phone call in the middle of the night had become a part of my job. After gathering the essential information from the call, I kissed my pregnant wife on the forehead and her bulging tummy dot. She mumbled sleepily, "Don't start anything you can't finish." I smiled, kissed her again, and proceeded to the crime site. As I arrived to a trailer, I thought about how my life had changed. I divorced Joy 5 years ago. I assumed it would be a simple process, but I was mistaken. During the divorce, my lawyer found Joy had not revealed her secret money account. I'd been wondering how she paid it, but a chance meeting with Cal Davis explained everything. He explained that Joy's unreported income came from bonus checks and commissions, which she transferred into her secret account with the help of an accountant and some inside knowledge. Joy had generated almost $120,000 in undisclosed income over the course of 6 years, according to my investigation. I contributed $30,000 to our joint account and proposed we split everything 50/50. Joy, on the other hand, sought 75%, arguing that she was being nice by not asking for half of the house I had inherited. My lawyer pushed back, and we eventually decided to share the joint account 50/50, with her receiving half of my business. I sold my portion of the masonry firm to my uncle and returned to school to finish my criminal justice degree. I currently work for the El Paso County Sheriff's Department. Far from the disaster that was my marriage to Joy, my lawyer was informed of each step I took and ensured that everything was legal. I even had my uncle write me a $1 receipt when I sold him my business. Joy had a smug expression when she received her settlement payment, but I'm sure it faded when she found her secret account had been drained. My accountant worked his magic, and we proved that all of the money in our joint account originated from genuine sources. I paid the taxes, and Joy had no idea she was funding my schooling. An anonymous tip to the IRS resulted in an audit, and while I was clear, Joy was not. She served a 6-month sentence for tax evasion. In a twist of fate, Garrett was blamed for taking her money because he had her bank card, and his defense was weak. He was convicted and sentenced to 35 years in prison for stealing and parole violations. Meanwhile, Katrina divorced Cal, who traveled to Utah to start again. Joy began working at a telemarketing agency after she was released from prison. She sent me an angry letter accusing me of wrecking her marriage and betraying her and Garrett. I threw it in the garbage and went on. When I informed my friend Paul about the letter, he quipped that I should have sold her to a brothel. I said that she would probably appreciate it. I worked as a patrol officer for 3 years before becoming a detective, and the Colorado Springs Police Department handled the majority of serious offenses. We noticed a lot of domestic violence cases. The only time I drew my weapon was when a woman threatened me with a knife after I arrested her abusive husband. That occurred a 1.5 years ago. I've been a detective ever since. I still don't understand why some women stay with abusive men, especially after witnessing numerous victims. One scenario had a woman nearing the end of her life, surrounded by empty beer bottles. I figured by the end of the day, I'd have the husband's name and could begin the search. It felt like a straightforward situation. Either the husband killed her in a jealous rage, or an ex-lover was involved. As I read prior patrol records, I understood that at the very least, I would not face repercussions from my superior for this instance. A 1.5 years into my detective career, a new detective joined our team. All I knew was that he came from the north. However, one night at a party near the station, I was shocked to meet Desiree Phillips. We talked for a time, and while some of the other detectives were annoyed that a patrol officer was conversing with her, we got along well. We became friends, and even after finding out she was single, I didn't pursue anything. I was jaded by relationships and did not want to complicate matters. We hung together periodically, going to dinner and movies, but I never considered it dating. One night, after a difficult case, I accompanied her to a bar. I stayed mostly sober to ensure she arrived home safely. When I brought her to her flat, she asked me to remove her boots and hugged me. She, quote, SS inebriated. "Zeke, I thought she was your best friend and you shouldn't take advantage of her." I backed aside and she no longer appeared to be intoxicated. "Why wouldn't you want me?" she asked. "What is wrong with me? First, you're inebriated and I don't want to damage our friendship with a regrettable recollection. Second, I'm just not prepared. After all, I have trust concerns. Did you like kissing me?" "Of course. You are one of the hottest women I know." I started, but she interrupted me. "Come with me. I'm not intoxicated and I'm not easygoing. I've only been with 4 guys and you know every story." She subsequently revealed that she had liked me since we met in Vail. But she had no idea I'd end up working in police enforcement. When she transferred, she saw it as a sign. That night marked the start of our relationship, and a year later we were married. A month later, we had our first kid. My supervisor was not pleased that she needed maternity leave and continually ridiculed me for getting her pregnant. I used to joke with you that Nora, our son, could be his godchild, but he didn't laugh. He was also upset that I took a month off for paternity leave, but I didn't mind. Desiree, to my delight, enjoys 2 movies, so life is good. Now I just hope Piper is okay with having both her mother and father around all the time. Something tells me she will be fine. Here is the next story. I was not pleased when I learned who would hear my petition for divorce. Richard Marshall was a good man in public, a good lawyer, and a reputed family law judge, but he needed to recuse himself in this case. He was much too close to the principals here. It was time for the first hearing. We were called to order. My attorney, Bill Blevins, immediately filed a motion for Judge Marshall to recuse himself. Richard denied the motion, and the preliminary hearing was proceeding. Nathan Bloodstone, my wife's attorney, lived up to his name. He always called me a scumsucker, citing how I had thrown Ali out into the street over a simple misunderstanding. I was the asshole who prevented her from seeing her beloved children, Jason and Becca, who are 12 and 10 years old, respectively. I had also frozen her checking and savings accounts and had to be held accountable for her financial situation. Of course, my attorney objected to every point raised by Mr. Bloodstone. He pointed out that it wasn't a simple misunderstanding, but that I had caught Allie in bed with not 1 but 2 lovers, and that I had shown great restraint by not assaulting or even threatening the 3, and had even left the bedroom so they could get dressed. And Allie had left of her own volition. During this posturing, I tried not to jump up and yell at all of the participants, so I reflected on happier times. Ali and I had met at college. It was not love at first sight, or even at the second signing. I first saw her from the back. She had short hair at the time and looked like a young boy from the back, standing only 5 feet 6 inches tall. Yes, I realize that is fairly typical for a woman, but as I previously stated, I mistook her for a young male from behind. When I looked at her from the front, she still looked like a young male person. She was and is doing fine. Features began to tip me off, as did the lack of beard growth and the very melodious voice. Her hands were fine and well-shaped as we were both in line to sign up for classes. We did not speak at that time. The next day, we were both late for a shared class, and there was only 1 empty chair that we were vying for. I knew she was all woman when she gave me a hip check before slamming down into the chair. Her smile spread across her entire face as she thanked me for the seat. "What can I do?" I acknowledged her and went to stand with a few other latecomers in the back of the room. The professor then reassigned some of us to his early morning class. And I hadn't seen Allie for a while. By the way, my name is Calvin Myers. Cal to my friends. I'm not a jock with leading man looks. I'm about 6 feet tall with brown hair and brown eyes. Okay, back to my story. We met a few weeks later at a stag party and began talking to each other. Of course, telling her that I had mistaken her for a boy was a major mistake. She exploded and made scathing remarks about people who make assumptions. I suppose she was fed up with people assuming she was a boy based solely on her appearance. She was not ashamed of her appearance. She was simply fed up with assumptions. I endured her scathing remarks for a while before putting my finger to her lips and asking, "Would you be willing to go out for supper with me so I can properly apologize?" She had a shocked expression on her face from the moment I placed my finger on her lips. She paused before nodding. "Good. When would you prefer to do this?" Allie smiled as she kissed my finger. "Right now would be an excellent time. Let's head to Denny's." So we did. We had a great time getting to know each other a little. We had the same major business administration and came from similar-sized communities. The towns weren't that far apart, so we made plans to at least share rides on holidays. We became friends. I mean that wholeheartedly. If I was studying and needed a break, I could call Allie and she would join me somewhere and we would have coffee and a slice of pie and catch up on events. She told me about guys she was dating and I would tell her my woes about cheating girlfriends. We hung out at the student union at times, studied together for finals when the movies were not dating others and just were in the friend zone all the time. Since she lived a little closer to the college, I would usually drive her home to her folks' place on my way home for holidays and school breaks. Over time, I met her parents, Dave and Marcia Billings, her siblings, one of each gender and younger than Allie, some of her friends and other relatives before going on to my hometown somewhere during our sophomore year. Things changed. Allie came to my apartment crying over her latest boyfriend. It seems he had a penchant for big girls and couldn't keep his eyes or his hands off well-developed women. He also treated Allie like shit whenever they were together and had been known to refer to her by very disparaging names associated with her physical charms. Allie was heartbroken when she heard some of the comments and names. My roommates happened to be gone that particular night, so we sat on a couch and proceeded to get drunk while discussing different revenge scenarios against her former boyfriend. I know I spent a lot of time reassuring her that she was all woman. As we got progressively drunker, her questions changed from how to screw with her boyfriend to why I had never tried anything with her. I was getting soused, so I am sure my answers made sense at the time, but probably not in the light of day in sobriety. I know I gave her pat answers and I didn't want to screw up our friendship and that we were just good buddies who could hang out with each other and not feel threatened. She came back with the usual, "What's wrong with me? Am I so ugly that you can't imagine having sex with me? Do I look so much like a boy that you might think you were not straight if you were attracted to me?" I am positive, and I gave good answers to her. But you never know about how a woman feels about sex in her body, and certainly not while drunk. I remember that suddenly she was topless. Maybe I had a blackout. They were fascinating. Now, I didn't have all that much experience with women. Only a couple of girls dated me long enough to sample their bodies, but I had seen a lot of adult movie after all. Isn't that what the internet is for? She went ballistic. She kissed me and started exploring my body. I was sitting there dumbfounded as well as drunk and still had all my clothes on. My limited experience with women had never prepared me for anyone like Allie. I'd not even seen anything like her. Any adult clips on the internet? I sat there in my drunken state and tried to figure out what my next move should be. Allie was still trying to catch her breath, and as she relaxed, she appeared to fall asleep. Maybe it was the booze and she was just passed out. I picked up Allie and took her to my bedroom and got her jeans off and covered her before I got my shirt and jeans off and joined her in the bed. I think I not only had my briefs on, but also my socks, and that is something I never sleep in. I probably also passed out instead of falling asleep, as I know I never moved an inch in that narrow bed that I was sharing with Allie. When I came to, I was being pummeled by small fists and being kicked by small feet. Allie was whispering, "His shouting would have killed us both. What the hell are you doing? Did you assaulted me? You asshole?" Other comments were also coming from her mouth, even though she was whispering. It sure sounded like screaming to me as I tried to tell her that she had initiated all the sex and that we were both still wearing our underwear, but she was pissed. Finally, I rolled out of the bed onto the floor to get away. She wasn't hitting hard enough to hurt me, but she was connecting often enough to piss me off. Finally, I had to shout, "Stop it! Stop it now! Look at yourself! I didn't screw you. You passed out and I put you into bed so you could be comfortable. We are still wearing our clothes." She finally stopped at the loudness of my voice and grabbed her ears. I shakily got to my feet and hunted down some water and pain medication. I took some and then offered more to her. She was now sitting up and her magnificent body were on full display. She took the water and downed the Motrin. After a few moments, she patted the bed to let me know it was now safe to return. I gingerly got back into the bed and tried to not touch her, but the bed was too small for that. She finally sighed and pulled me into her arms and promptly fell back asleep. I couldn't do the same just as I convinced myself to relax. Soon her upper body was against me. Then, after some time, she relaxed and let me loose again. I stripped off the briefs and finished my shower and washed my hair. After I was done, Allie was now awake and washed me from the bed as I got dressed. I left the bedroom and she must have then gotten up and showered before dressing in her previous evening's clothing and prepared for the walk from the apartment. I couldn't let her do that. Though. It was now about noon, so I grabbed her hand and took her to Burger King and we ate a light meal. It was awkward talking for a while, but we finally started to giggle at how we had acted and then started to laugh and we were back to being friends again. But it was different now. I was looking at her differently instead of just being a good friend. I was looking at her as a new lover, one I wanted to date and get to know a new and different level. We were exclusive after that. No wind screw immediately away. We started to visit each other every evening to study, not just on occasion. We started to eat most of our lunches and supper together. We would suddenly stop and hug and kiss. Honestly. We would hug, kiss, and then make out for a while before trying to get back to studying. We started to rent movies to watch together, and seldom viewed the whole thing at one time. We would start to watch a movie while sitting close to one other. One day, Ellie brought me to the bed and she perched on the side and started to remove all my clothes. And that was the first time we consummated entirely our relationship. It wasn't the last by any means. We carried on throughout our college days and married shortly after graduation. We both acquired nice careers at different local companies, but were never really competitors in any manner. We explored and our connection progressed. I guess you could say we had a terrific sex life and a lot of relationships. The couple waits years to have children, but we were eager to begin our family. As first-time homebuyers, we were able to qualify for a mortgage with only a 5% down payment, rather than the standard 10 to 20%. So, we bought our first home in a great area, and Allie became pregnant with Jason. The pregnancy proceeded well, but Allie had to have a cesarean section. We spent many hours massaging her belly, so there were a few stretch marks and her bikini cut was difficult to detect. Allie was worried about how she would milk her clearly very sensitive canines, but motherhood seemed to flip a switch in her as her mill arrived. When Jason was over a year old, Allie became pregnant again at the conclusion of her pregnancy. We had a small daughter called Rebecca, but we soon shortened her name to Becca. We both advanced in our various companies and our compensation increased, so we moved to a nicer and larger home. Our community did not have a gated area of town, but we lived in a high-rent district. Some of our immediate neighbors were physicians, lawyers, and accountants. Our city isn't large enough to support a professional sports team, but if it did, some of the players may have ended up in our neighborhood. One of our neighbors was Richard, a lawyer. Call me Rick Marshall. When we moved into the area, he was around 40 years old and married to Lindsay. Rick was attractive, at least according to Allie, and had a dignified air about him. He was tall and toned. He clearly worked out a lot between court appearances. Lindsay, his wife, was around 5 feet 5 inches tall and slim, but she had not been gifted with attractive features. Don't get me wrong, she wasn't ugly, just ordinary looking. She wore her hair slightly longer than Allie did. Allie had always had very short hair, which was maybe a little more obvious than Ali's, but we were still small. When we moved into the neighborhood, the Marshalls' 2 children were in their late teens and about to start college. We met them all during block parties conducted throughout the year. The Marshalls' family dynamic was slightly altered by the addition of another female, Ronnie Walton. No one knew the actual nature of the relationship, but she was not related to the Marshalls and was not the nanny or housekeeper. Lindsay was a nursing home administrator, while Ronnie worked as a nurse at the same facility. Some of the wagging tongues were convinced that Ronnie was Rick's lover, and Lindsay had welcomed her. However, in public, Ronnie and Lindsay were usually together, and Rick didn't appear to receive any affection from Ronnie, leading others to think that Ronnie was Lindsay's lover, which Rick had accepted. Nobody knew for certain, and no one ever inquired. They had lived in this neighborhood for a long time and were well liked. Some of the wagging tongues discussed how Lindsay had never been a particularly attentive mother, always hiring nannies to care for the kids before Ronnie moved in, and how one of the nannies, a high school girl, even went on vacation with a Marshall, and how Lindsay had taken the girl shopping on numerous occasions while leaving the kids with Rick. Of course, these wagging tongues assume Ronnie and Lindsay were lovers, and Lindsay most certainly corrupted the poor 18-year-old high school student. Nobody could say for certain, as with many other hypotheses, but it made for intriguing conversations at otherwise dull block parties. By this point, both of our children were in school. Our lovemaking had continued unabated. I could still make Ali hotter than a gun by simply nuzzling her neck. We went on with our lives, and nothing seemed to change after we turned 30. We worked out and worked, but we made sure that work didn't follow us home every evening. The children were growing and becoming more autonomous. They stayed overnight, sometimes with friends, and we made sure to rock the rafters when they weren't home. Life was good. Then life wasn't so great, fast ahead a few years. Rick was no longer called that. He was now Richard Marshall. While still lovely to sit and converse with, he was moving away from some of us. He had ambitions outside his attorney's office. He became the public defender and took part in some headline-grabbing defenses. He was establishing a name for himself. Eventually, it paid off. A judgeship became available, and he was appointed by the governor to the bench. Yep, we all needed to be more respectful of him. He stopped hanging around with anyone. There was no joking, and especially no booze in his presence. He was a terrifying presence on the bench. His pals, the other public defenders, began to despise him. He knew all of their tricks and frequently foiled them as they attempted to exonerate their clients. At the same time, no one ever accused him of being biased towards the prosecution. He was a staunch advocate for the rule of law. According to all accounts, life in the Mears household had not altered, but the neighborhood did. We are almost up to the most current events. While neither Ali nor my employers required us to perform more or modified our workloads, we had not been communicating as well in recent weeks. Ali appeared distant and out of touch with what was going on at home. I'm not sure if the kids noticed it, but since we hadn't made love in a few weeks, I felt it more intensely. After speaking with guys whose wives had strayed, I feel that the genuinely honest individual who violates his or her marriage vows tends to react in a certain way. This person strives to be honest and decent, thus lying and dissembling are difficult for him. Very few people are talented actors. This essentially honest person prefers to withdraw from family, expressing their remorse through terrible temper outbursts or frequent tears. I was concerned as Ali became away from me and the children. I try to remember where this might have started and eventually determine it must have started during our last block party. It was held at the Richardsons down the block, and Ali and I had no official responsibilities other than bringing some beer and wine. Ali had been circulating with me for the first hour or so, but then she struck up a conversation with Lindsay and Ron. This wasn't unusual, except that Ali seemed somber on our walk home from the party, and she had grown aloof since then. I began calling her at her work phone every day to let her know I cared and was thinking of her. I would call at random times without a pattern, so she couldn't predict when I would call. They were brief calls, usually to check on arrival times at home, a menu for supper, or simply to let her know if the kids arrived home safely from school that day. She was occasionally abrupt with me, but most of the time she was pleasant and thanked me for the call. I think it was Wednesday that I couldn't reach her. The receptionist informed me that Ali had left the office early that day due to a severe headache and was on his way home. I didn't call her, but I did notify my boss of a family issue and went home as well. When I went home, I found only Ali's car in the garage. I assumed she had a headache and entered the home based on the commotion from our bedroom. It did not sound like she was in pain. Quite the reverse. She sounded like she was having the greatest sexual pleasure of all time. I slowly up the stairs, but given the cover noise, I could have marched up them. Ali was making. I paused on the landing, took out my phone, and launched the video app before heading to the master bedroom's open door. I glanced over the doorframe and saw Ali and Lindsay. "Hey, Ronnie, I was wondering what would happen if I did the same. Do you think she'll lose her mind?" They were too caught up in their sex fest. Lindsay spoke again while I was filming. "I'm wondering if we should pierce her before handing her to Richard. I had enough of video." I walked inside the bedroom. Ronnie noticed me first. She at least had the decency to blush and back off from my wife. "Lindsay, fun is finished. Allow my wife to get up." These were the first words out of my mouth. Lindsay jerked in surprise. Lindsay stood up and attempted to appear apologetic, but I wasn't buying it. "So you were preparing my wife for your husband?" She looked up, surprised, and then slowly nodded. "Were you both his pimps? Do you go out and seduce women for him?" "Sometimes. Sometimes it's for us. It would only be for a while because he gets weary of them rapidly. She would be returned unharmed after he was finished." She blushed when I looked at her in surprise. Ali understood I was in the room. She squealed and then attempted to shield herself from my gaze. I let out a cynical chuckle. "Ali, you have a lot of money. Here. We've been married for nearly 15 years, and when you're caught in bed with two ladies, you try to shield yourself from my gaze. You are sin. And now you can't be seen by the sinless. I made a decision. I will not interfere with Richard's ideas. Get dressed. All three of you, get out of my house. You have 5 minutes before I call family and friends to tell them what type of animals you are. I exited the chamber before I lost my rage and decided to kill everyone, including the judge, Richard Marshall. I didn't quite maintain control, though. I went down to the kitchen, grabbed a glass, poured some nice Kentucky bourbon, pounded it down, and threw the tumbler against the backsplash behind the counter. The sound of glass cracking was a fair representation of what my heart was doing. I took another glass and repeated the activity. Bourbon is in the glass. Slam it down my throat. Feel the burn. Slam the glass against the backsplash. Another glass and 2 more fingers of bourbon before the glass joined the others. I then heard the door close. When I turned, I saw 3 devils hurrying down the street toward the Marshall house a block away. I quote, "Am not ashamed to admit that I slumped to the floor with an open bottle of bourbon in my hand." I started crying. My best friend in the world had betrayed me, as had my lover, wife, and children's mother. I begged God, why not take her in an accident or through cancer, not through betrayal? I started drinking directly from the bottle. My children arrived home at their usual time. Jason was now 12 and Becca was 10. They were astonished to discover me sitting on the kitchen floor with smashed glass all over the counter, and I know I looked terrible. They had no idea what to do with me, and when they went to call their mother, they discovered her phone on the charger in the kitchen. They eventually referred to their grandparents as my parents, and my mother was soon trying to make sense of my ramblings. Dad went up to the bedroom and made some assumptions that could explain why Ali's car was there, but she wasn't. I don't drink much or very often, so the straight bourbon, along with the depression of finding my wife in the arms of 2 lovers, had me badly intoxicated. I remember telling the kids to leave me alone at least a dozen times. Then my mother got in my face and I started crying about how Ali had betrayed us all, especially me. I'm not sure if Mom understood what I was saying, but she tried to console me. Well, perhaps she did. I recall her questioning what I'd done to make Ali angry with me. I don't think she liked me after I told her to screw off and die. I then crept on my hands and knees into the living room, climbed up onto a couch, pulled the throw over my head, and ignored her. Dad must have came down to tell her what he discovered upstairs. The toys didn't tell him the tale, but when a neighbor came over to ask what had been going on since I returned home, he must have told my parents about witnessing the 3 women go on foot, and together Dad finally assumed that the extra women in the home were not my sex partners, if Ali had accompanied them. A few hours later, the kids had been fed and were attempting to sleep, but I suppose were still trying to figure out why their mother wasn't home. I was becoming coherent, despite the fact that I couldn't sit up yet. Dad and Mom were pressing me about specifics, so I finally handed them my phone and instructed them to see the gallery. They found the video and watched it with gaping mouths before hurriedly turning it off. Mom started it. "How do you know Ali wasn't the victim of an assault?" I know I gave her a look of complete surprise. "Well, Mom, if it is assault, it has been going on since the last block party. Didn't Lindsay say she created Ali during the party, and Ronnie mentioned performing Ali a few days ago? Also, Ali has remained aloof since the party, and I am concerned about her. But she refused to speak with me. Do you think she was on narcotics?" We often hear about data, assault, and narcotics on the news. She did not appear to be influenced by anything other than the 2 women. She was not even protesting. No, I believe she was seduced, but she was absolutely not unwilling. She has also not been romantic towards me since that party. I believe she had a bad conscience and could not tolerate having sex with me while cheating on me. Dad then had to ask the $64,000 question. "What are you going to do?" I sat up and rested my head on my hands. "I don't know, Father. I honestly don't know. I want her with us, but without the cheating. She is still my wife and mother of my children, and I adore her. But I don't particularly like her at the time." I stared him directly in the eyes. She didn't say anything in her defense while this was going on. There wasn't any. It isn't as it seems. Or, "Let me explain," or "I love you, and we can get through this. No comma." She didn't say anything. I left the room after interrupting their little love fest so they could get dressed and went to the kitchen to start drinking. I was surely not inebriated before they left the house. She did not even say goodbye. Or I'll call you or something else when she leaves. I gazed at the big clock on the wall. She had chosen the same colors that we had decorated with years before. She's been gone for hours and hasn't called us at all. Has she tried calling the kids' phones? Mom shakes her head. So I guess she chose them over us, Dot. The ball is in her court. I believe she went to the marshal's house, but I'm not sure. Her phone is still here. I'm not sure if she brought her pocketbook or keys with her. Finally, I led my concerned parents out of the house so they could go home and rest. It took nearly an hour to go to my former hometown, Dot. It was approximately 10 p.m. So I made a call to Allie's parents. It was a difficult phone call to make because they are decent individuals. Her entire family is. I told them Allie and I were going through a hard patch. I didn't tell them anything specific about the love fest I had disrupted. They didn't need to know all the details, Dot. It was difficult enough when my parents saw the video. I just informed the Billings that Allie had left the house, and I had not communicated with her this evening. Dave was quick to ask what was going on. He persisted until I confessed. I found her with two lovers in our bedroom this afternoon. Dot, she quote, I'll tell you that I threw her out, but I simply instructed them to leave. She didn't try to talk to me, beg for forgiveness, nothing at all. She just left with her lovers. She left all of her possessions, including her car and phone, here. She literally left with nothing. I think I know where she is, but I'm not certain. I wanted you to know that this isn't my fault, but she could be calling you for assistance. That? Shut him up. Well, I almost shut him up. He stuttered for a moment, and I could imagine his face turning crimson as his blood pressure rose. It must be difficult to have your son-in-law call and inform you that your daughter is a cheat with a 3 or 4 dot eventually comma. He gained control of himself. How about the kids? I do not know, Dave. They are currently sleeping, albeit not soundly. They call my parents for assistance. They discovered me seated on the kitchen floor. I'm sorry to admit that I didn't handle myself well. After I ended their love affair, I went to the kitchen and began drinking before she left the house, Dot. I quote, am worried I wasn't setting a good example of an adult when they got home. I'm sober now and will get by. I may contact you to take them up occasionally while Allie and I work things out. Dave agreed and promised me that they would be available as much as possible and that the kids might come to their house this weekend if it could be arranged. I thanked him and hung up after saying my goodbyes. Now we need to find a place to sleep. I couldn't bear the notion of sleeping in the bed where I saw my wife with 2 other women. I could barely go into the bedroom to get some clothing to sleep in. I nearly puked on the floor at the mental image. I swiftly exited the room and closed the door without altering its appearance. It would have to wait until I could better manage myself. Thankfully, the couch was huge and lengthy. It was difficult to change positions, but my feet did not slip off the couch, and I was able to fully stretch out. My morning sleep was fitful at best, but I realized it must have been deep enough for someone to enter the house. Ali, quote, S phone was gone, and her car was vanished from the garage. I had to look closely in her closet later to see if she or someone else had packed some clothing to take away. I woke the kids up for school and we ate a chilly breakfast. I forced myself to shower and shave in the master bathroom. I ran through the bedroom, and it wasn't until I returned after my shower that I realized the toy had vanished, but the bedding remained. I had another question. Had Richard screwed her now? I mentally shrugged, got dressed, and exited the room. I dropped the children off at school, back at her elementary school and Jason at middle school. I immediately went to work and tried to figure out what my next step should be. I called a friend and asked for advice for an attorney. He had gotten a horrible divorce after his wife found him screwing his secretary. He recommended William Blevins as a competent family lawyer. Blevins had been his wife's attorney, so he was familiar with the type of sharky. I also went to the bank during my lunch break and transferred half of my savings and roughly half of my checking account balances to new accounts with only my name on them. I spoke with a bank manager about credit cards, and he told me that I would have to pay off the balances to have them canceled. And even then, Ali might insist on the cards remaining active because they were joint cards. He suggested me to pay off the bills first, then call and request that the limit be reduced to just a few dollars above the balance. He stated any justification was acceptable to the credit card companies, but he suggested I tell them I had just been laid off. The limits would be reduced immediately. That proved to be a smart decision. Within a few hours, I received notices that Ali had attempted to use the cards to purchase certain items, but the cards were declined because the balances were too close to their limits. Ali never tried to contact me or the kids. I understand not talking to me because she had broken our marriage vows, but not calling the kids was nearly criminal in my opinion. I called her office that Thursday to see if she had arrived for work. Her secretary explained that she had called in ill and questioned why I was calling. I didn't enlighten her, just thanked her and hung up. I considered changing the locks on the house, but ultimately decided against it. Actually, I did not need to alter the locks. I had installed keyless entry lock sets for the kids a few years ago, and all I needed to do was update the codes. If I arrived home one night and found the place bare, I would use it to take her into court. I visited with Mr. Blevins on Friday, following another restless night on the couch. I was able to remove the sheets off the bed and wash it all up, but I wasn't ready to return to the bedroom just yet. When William calls me Bill, please meet with me. We immediately hit it off. He was quite vocal about cheating spouses having to pay for their mistakes. I hadn't decided whether to divorce Ali yet, so we discussed the practicalities of terminating a marriage. I discovered that Ali would most certainly receive house custody of the children, as well as some form of separate maintenance or alimony to support her lifestyle. I had to giggle at her ability to sustain her new lifestyle, but I quickly calmed down when I considered how I would possibly live if we broke up. I wouldn't be in a cardboard box beneath the train trestle, but it wouldn't be a glamorous living at 35 years of age. I could look forward to dating again, but I really want to. Because Ali had not attempted to call or contact me or the kids, William suggested I notify the cops and newspapers. I could tell them where I thought she was, and they'd check it out and report back on how she was doing. It doesn't hurt your cause to convince the judge that you still care about her well-being. When I informed him where I believed she was living or hiding and showed him the video, he got extremely thoughtful. We had appeared to be extremely close and comradely at first, but Bill quickly became distant and quiet. After a long and awkward pause, I asked him what was wrong. He began as if he had not noticed how the meeting had changed. "Oh, I am sorry, Jill. When you mentioned Judge Marshall's name and how he might be involved in your marriage, it made me think of a cousin of mine. She had been the Marshall's nanny for a few years when she was only 18 or 19. She transformed from a very extroverted, beautiful girl to a narcotic-addicted shell of her former self. Despite extensive therapy, we were unable to determine what had caused her to transform. I'd always wondered about Richard's wife and her present living situation and whether her habits had anything to do with Rachel's demise." He paused and glanced at me. "I don't know why I'm bringing this up. It probably has little to do with the current circumstance and will have no bearing on your marriage or divorce. Please disregard all of my musings. I've chosen to postpone any divorce proceedings for the time being. I did stop by the local precinct to file a missing person report. The officer taking the report appeared bored until I told him where I thought Ali could be. His eyes lit up at the mention of Judge Marshall's name. I'm not sure if that was bad or good, but he was quick to send a car to the good judge's house to check on Ali. He led me to a quiet room and served me a cup of coffee as we waited for the report. After 30 long and lonely minutes, a detective walked in and sat with me. He identified himself as Hiram Wilson. I realize that's an uncommon name in this day and age, but it's a family name, and I've grown accustomed to it. But let us come back to your visit here today. According to the sergeant, your wife left your residence on Wednesday and returned during that night to remove certain belongings, including her automobile. Is this right?" I nodded and explained. "Wednesday afternoon, I found my wife in bed with 2 women from the neighborhood. I told her to leave with them. The women were Lindsay Marshall and Ronnie Walton, who lived just a few blocks away. She has not made any attempt to contact me since she departed, which I understand. But what is difficult to understand is that she has made no attempt to contact our children, which is very strange to her. Have you tried contacting her in any way?" "No. I've left it up to her until now. Could you please try and contact her right now?" When I dialed her cell phone, it immediately went to voicemail. Hiram nodded when I informed him that she was not taking my call. I wondered. A patrolman was dispatched to the Marshall residence to check on your wife. He spoke with a judge who assured him that he had halted to check up my wife's name. Here it is. He is sure. The patrolman confirmed that Allie was all right, but he was unable to come to the door at the moment because there was no evidence to suggest that a crime had been committed. He had no option but to leave the premises. The judge is well knowledgeable about the law and can use it to stymie us. He leaned back in his chair. I'm not sure what else we can do for you at this time. We have been advised that your wife is in good health and is at the Marshall's home. She is not, and hence technically missing. Simply not at home. Have you checked to see if your wife went to work today? I nodded. Yes. I contacted mid-morning and she was at work today despite skipping the day before. When I inquired about her appearance, her assistant was astonished and informed me that Allie appeared to be well. I suppose this is as far as we can go officially in this situation. I apologize that we were unable to communicate directly with your wife. In these circumstances, the patrolman will normally inform the wayward spouse who filed the report that he or she should notify everyone that they are safe. Hopefully, she will contact someone soon. That ended the police participation in our lives, and I went home to make the kids some food. Both of the youngsters have cell phones with limited calling capabilities. They had Ali's and my numbers as well as their grandparents. I had them each try calling their mother. They did so, leaving voice messages. We all sent text messages urging her to contact us. I also urged her parents to contact and text her. There was no reaction during the weekend. The kids were down most of the time since they adored their mother. I was perplexed and concerned that Ali would be a cheating 3 or 4, but she was an excellent mother. I couldn't understand how she couldn't contact her kids. The kids did travel to the Billings house for the weekend, and Dave promised me that they would keep them busy with chores and activities so they wouldn't have time to think about their mother. I'm delighted our kids are excellent kids who like seeing their grandparents. They hadn't reached the age where they were bored at Grandma and Grandpa's. I thought I was bored. I took care of the house and had the bedroom well cleaned and aired out. I rearranged the furnishings so it didn't look like the same room. I know, it was the room I discovered my wife screwing in, but I could deceive myself into thinking everything was new and different. Our home is filled with artifacts that remind me of Ali Hill. In fact, it includes the garage. When I glanced at the space where her automobile usually sits, I was reminded of the realm of men around the world. I had to simply learn to ignore the clues and reminders of our married existence. I took care of the grass, and then it was beer. 30, and I had a couple to rehydrate. Then I did something I had promised myself not to do. I pulled over and parked across the street from Marshall's house. There was nothing to see, so I sat down and watched the front of the home. Nobody came out, and there were no visitors while I waited there for more than an hour. I couldn't spy on the backyard without informing all of the neighbors, as the community had grown. The Marshalls, like many others, had a large fence surrounding their backyard to provide privacy. I drove to the market and got some stuff to make a small lunch, then returned and parked across the street for an hour. Still no activity. I finally got out and stepped up to the door. I was silently berating myself for not doing it sooner. I rang the doorbell, and Lindsay answered it. I took careful to stay far enough back from the door to ensure whoever answered that I wasn't trying to force my way in. I expected Richard would call the cops as soon as he learned I was there. Good afternoon, Lindsay. You look good. Actually, she didn't, as her face turned ashen as she noticed who was there on her porch. I went on. I was wondering if I could speak with Allie. The children are disappointed that she has not contacted them or sought to return home. She looked over her shoulder before responding. I apologize, Mr. Myers, but she is now occupied and unable to come to the door. Since when have I been Mr. Myers? Lindsay? We've known each other for years. Her color was returning. Mr. Myers, since you told us to leave your house, we haven't really known you. Unless you want to get arrested for trespassing, please get off my property. She swiftly closed the door. I had activated my phone's video app as I approached the stroll because I expected something like this to happen. Just as I turned away, the first squad car arrived, and 2 cops got out. This was unusual because our small city typically had only 1 police each car. One of the officers wore lieutenant's bars over his shoulders. That may explain why there were two of them. A few more cruisers came. "Sir, may you join me in the car?" The first cop quickly requested my cooperation. "I apologize, cops. What appears to be the problem? We received a call reporting a verbal altercation at this residence. Do you mind putting your hands on the car's edge so we can check for weapons?" I complied, and they patted me down and temporarily took away my phone. "Officer, I can promise you that there was no fighting here. My wife and I have separated, and she is staying at the judge's house for a few days. I just wanted to communicate with her about our children without causing a scene. We will look into your story. At the meanwhile, I would appreciate your cooperation and request that you take a seat at the back of the car." I complied because any resistance would be pointless and risk injuring myself. The lieutenant went to the door and examined the good judge. I quote, "I'm not sure what story the judge created, but the lieutenant was unhappy when he returned to the car." They rolled down the window so I could talk. They were quite polite. "Sir, Judge Marshall reports you stormed up to the door and beat on it until he responded, and then you attempted to push past him and inside the home. Have you done that?" I began to chuckle. "No, Lieutenant, I didn't do it. As I mentioned to your other officer here, my wife and I are separated, and she is staying here for a few days. I only wanted to chat with her about our children. She doesn't answer the phone or reply messages, so I wanted to chat to her in person, just talk. Mind you, she has not contacted the children. They are quite upset and perplexed by the situation." He did not seem convinced. After all, a sitting judge told him a quite different story. "Look, I understand you don't believe me, but you have my phone. You can check for yourself. The history of phone calls and mails shows that I attempted to contact her several times since yesterday. I tried calling her at work yesterday, but they wouldn't put me through, and I videotaped my approach to the house this afternoon. I did not pound on the door, and Judge Marshall did not answer it. His wife, Lindsay, did. I didn't demand or argue with her. She shut the door in my face after telling me to leave the premises. I was leaving when you brought up that tiny detail. You should realize that he was upset. I'm not sure who went, but he was mad." He unlocked my phone and read my story. Because I was correct, he became enraged and stomped back up to the house, ringing the doorbell. There was a brief, heated argument before the lieutenant shrugged his shoulders and returned to the car. "Mr. Myers, I am sorry to inform you that the judge has filed charges against you for trespassing and making terrorist threats. I have no choice but to cite you because there is strong proof that you did not make any threat. At this point, I'll simply issue you a ticket and send you on your way. Please contact your attorney, as all of this will be given to the district attorney on Monday morning. Normally, you would be transported to jail and processed before being released on bail, but I do not believe that is required at this time. Please do not approach the judge or his family in any way again." I nodded. They swiftly issued me a penalty and allowed me get out of the car before I crossed the street. I asked for a favor. "Would you tell Detective Wilson about this incident? I filed a missing person report for my wife, Sally Myers, yesterday, and he was in charge of the investigation. Actually, your patrolman did not speak with my wife yesterday either, just someone in the house reassuring him that she was all right." The lieutenant nodded and returned his gaze to the house. His expression suspicious. Something didn't add up here for him. I knew someone was looking from the front window, so I waved the citation in the air and returned to my car, where I remained for a while before heading home. A solitary patrol car remained there until I left. My brain was spinning. What was the deal? Why was I not able to speak with my wife? Why was she ignoring our kids? And why did the good judge file false reports against me? We had never disagreed before this week. And just because I overheard Lindsay remark that they were prepping Ali for Richard does not imply it was true. We've all said things in the heat of fury that we didn't mean. There have to be some answers. When I returned home, I contacted Bill Blevins' answering service and left a message regarding the citation. He contacted me back a few minutes later and he told me how stupid I was to approach Ali directly. He then giggled at the prospect of dealing with a false filing accusation against the excellent judge on Monday. We then agreed that if Ali did not contact me by the end of the following week, we would file for divorce. We had to drag her into a meeting and even testify so that Bill could ask her directly what was going on in her thoughts. By the way, that is not legalese, but Bill's words did not sound particularly strong. I was restless after that phone call. so I went for a walk around the neighborhood. I wasn't looking for a discussion, but it was early evening and still warm. Many folks were also out for an evening walk. Everyone who stopped to talk inquired about Ali. I was honest and told everyone that I had discovered Ali with 2 lovers, that she had fled with him and was now staying with the Marshalls while we worked out our future. I never mentioned her lovers' names. If the receiver wanted to make an inference, he could. When asked if Ali and I were going to work things out, I just shrugged and said we'd have to work hard and communicate openly. By the time I got home, I'd spoken with 4 or 5 of our neighbors, and I knew the gossip would spread throughout the neighborhood. Perhaps Ali would respond. Unfortunately, it did not receive a response. I'm not sure if any of the Marshall residents heard the gossip or just ignored it and went about their business. However, there was no contact with Ali. On Monday, I informed my boss about the citation and that the police might be coming to see me. I also informed him that I had lost my marriage. He sympathized. He took fidelity much more seriously and made certain that all policies governing extracurricular activities were strictly followed. He even told new employees that he never wanted anyone to go through what he and his ex-wife had gone through. By the time he finished explaining the damage done to families, most new employees had to take the rest of the day off to go home and profess their undying love and loyalty to their spouse. He gave me unrestricted time off to handle my affairs within reason. He certainly hoped I wouldn't end up in jail for this. I knew I'd have to work extra hours to make up for any time off I took. After all, the business world isn't concerned with your personal problems. Before I forget, I'm sure you want to know about Jason and Rebecca. The kids had arrived home on Sunday night and jumped out of the car, expecting to see their mother greet them when they realized she wasn't there yet. The poor dears deflated. Becca began to cry and hit me when I attempted to hug her. I thought she was just upset over not being able to see her mom. I was also crying. Dave suddenly became enraged. "Let's go see if your mother will communicate with you. Quickly hop in the car and we'll go see her." I was taken aback, but I saw no damage in this unexpected development. The Marshalls would not arrest Allie's parents or her children, would they? I gave Dave the address, and he nearly left rubber on my driveway as he shot back onto the street and flew away towards the Marshalls. Fortunately, there was no traffic at that time of evening. One of my neighbors was outdoors and gave me an inquisitive look. I went over and told him that Ali's parents were attempting to get her and the kids together with my permission. He nodded and walked inside. I'm sure the rumor line was quickly activated again. They were gone for more than an hour. When they returned, the children appeared depressed and ready to burst into tears at any moment. Most of them appeared stunned and perplexed. Aside from the affection of their father and both sets of grandparents, their entire world was turned upside down. Marcia was crying. Dave was beyond furious. I eventually got the kids to sleep for the night. It took a long time. Becca was upset that she had hit me and was afraid I would abandon her like her mother. She needed to fall asleep before I could leave her room. Jason had improved little, but he still clung to me. Then I told him good night. Hawk. I eventually made my way back to the living room where the bills were waiting. Dave was sipping his beer. I know he wanted to really tie it up, but he had to drive home and didn't want to risk an accident. Marcia was drinking her second or third glass of wine. I didn't know how much she had drunk while I was getting the kids down. I start the conversation. "I assume the visit did not go well. Did you see Allie?" Dave responded, and Marcia began to cry. "Yes or no?" She came to the door when I asked to see her children. She stood at the door telling me to go. She cried the entire time. She would not go outside or try to touch the children. I moved them in front of me, but she still had to look at them. She just continued looking up at me, refusing to interact with them or speak to them. He paused and took a large swig from his bottle. "I do not know her. She resembles my daughter, yet she does not act like her. I started telling her to remove her head out of her, but when authorities arrived, we were told to leave or face arrest for trespassing. There was a lieutenant who approached and apologized for having to advise us to leave. We spent much of our time chatting to the cops. It was odd. I nodded. That sounds like the same cop who arrived last night after I was arrested for trespassing and making terrorist threats. I apologize. I suppose I should have stopped you from trying to talk to her. It surely did not benefit the children." Dave shakes his head. No. This had to be done now. Marcia and I will testify, if required, regarding how Ali treated her own children. I don't understand her strategy, and I don't know these people, but it appears like they have a plan in place. She didn't appear to be on drugs or brainwashed in any manner. We talked for a few minutes longer. I told them about my intentions for the coming week. They were quite sorry, but they agreed that something had to be done. Dave shook my hand, and Marcia hugged me as they departed on Monday. Bill Blevins called me at 11 a.m. He had spoken with one of the assistant district attorneys. I think they called him. Yes, I had forwarded him the video and screenshots of the communications I had sent to Ali, to which there had been no response. He also had Detective Wilson's name for the ADA right now. The ADA was not going to prosecute me. She seemed more worried with the evident incorrect reporting and the potential public relations nightmare. If I go public at noon, I headed out for lunch and a trip to the post office. You know the kind of establishment I'm talking about. You can drop off mail and packages, and they will work with the Postal Service, UPS, and FedEx to have them delivered. The store also offers courier services. I had a car sent to Ali at her workplace. They called at 3 p.m. to inform me that the card had been delivered. At 4, I called Ali at work. As expected, she declined my call, so I spoke with her secretary, Amy Spelling. She informed me that Ali was acting normally, as if there was no difficulty at home. She was taken aback when I told her Ali was living separately from us and that she had no contact with the children. She openly disbelieved me and told me so. I brought up the card I'd mailed. It was a blank card, so I had just put a letter inside asking her to contact the children. Amy told me that Ali looked at the card, dumped it in the wastebasket without saying anything, and then locked her door. When I asked her to check on Ali, she returned and stated it appeared Ali had been weeping. She was perplexed when I said, "Good." I let her leave. Then this became my daily activity. I purchased a card. I sent a note just asking her to let the kids know she cared about them. After photographing the card, I would mail it to her at work. I assumed that if I delivered one to the house, it would be refused. After allowing it time to be delivered, I would phone Amy to see if Ali had received the card. She told me that on Tuesday and Wednesday, Ali had examined the card before tossing it. The remainder were thrown away unopened. Tuesdays and Wednesdays. She then closed her door and probably cried for a long. On Thursday and Friday, she appeared irritated and left her door open. I'd failed again. The kids did their best to be decent kids. Every morning, they woke up and ate breakfast before I drove them to school. They walked home and were usually there by 4. They were not allowed to visit when we were not present, but they may visit other households with permission. This week, they spent every after-school hour at the home of one of their friends. In the evenings, we divided the responsibilities. Even Becca tried to cook. It was a simple lunch of hot dogs and canned baked beans, but it was delicious and satisfying. They had a few squabbles, but they were much more subdued than usual. I was concerned that this was not regular behavior for them. Every night I had to stay with Becca until she fell asleep. Instead of switching which child I put to bed first, I had to begin talking to the child next to me before moving on to Rebecca. A few nights ago, I awoke to find a youngster in bed with me. Either Jason or Becca would wake up, use the restroom, and then crawl in with me. I suppose this reassured them that I was not abandoning them like Ali had done. I'd wake them up and snuggle them for a few minutes before returning them to bed. We did this when kids were toddlers and had their first experience with a real bed. It had been happening virtually every night for a time now. We seemed to have made it through another weekend. I began to think of my days and nights as before, Ali and after Ali. She'd been gone for a week and a half. On Monday, I spoke with Bill. We had agreed on a general course of action. I informed him about Billings's attempt to persuade Ali to speak with the kids. I had mentioned that his one regret was not having footage of Ali's response to her father. The papers was filed at the courthouse, and Ali was served at work in the afternoon. I called Amy and asked how things had gone, as Ali had not attempted to contact me after being served. Amy stated that Ali appeared to be expecting a visit from the process server, and she had not said anything, instead taking the rest of the afternoon off and leaving the building. I thanked her for being a good friend to both of us and informed her that I would not be contacting again. Bill requested a preliminary meeting in front of a judge. Instead of dancing around and requesting a meeting with lawyers. He did not anticipate Ali to instantly hire a counsel, and he believed that a meeting in front of a court would put her in a position where we could converse. That brings us to this farce of a preliminary hearing. For some reason, Judge Marshall believed he could be an objective judge in my marriage case. Bill informed me that this was intended to be the hearing where temporary child custody would be granted, support would be ordered, and who would reside where would be determined. Ali left voluntarily and made no attempt to speak with me or the children. Bill assumed that requesting Ali's help would be simple. That was not to be. Bill, S attempt to bring Ali on the witness and provide her side was stopped by Judge Marshall, who stated that her opinions were included in the brief that had to be filed prior to the hearing. He ignored Bill, presenting the facts about how I had treated Ali rather than using bloodstones, name-calling, and blatant lying. I took the stand, and Bill inquired about what had occurred. Mr. Bloodstone opposed to every comment, including the use of video footage of the incident as evidence. Judge Marshall appeared to consider before deciding to keep the video from being made public. He also imposed a gag order stating that the footage should not be shown to anyone. Bill complained but was overruled. I was sworn in, and Bill attempted to make my side of the story public. Bloodstone objected so strongly that it was unclear which question I could respond. He opposed to everything I said before I even started. Most of the time, the court upheld the objection, thus I was unable to adequately express my side of the tale. We eventually gave up, and I resumed my seat. The end result was that, despite the fact that Ali did not have custody of the children and did not request it, I was required to pay her over $500 per month in child support and another $1,000 per month in maintenance, despite the fact that our wage was equivalent. I got to keep the house and the kids, but I was promised that HHS would be notified and would contact me to ensure I was being a decent parent. What a lot of bullshit. Ali never uttered once during the entire ordeal. After Judge Marshall adjourned the session, I stood and asked her, "When will you speak with me, and what will you say to your children? Every night they cry, wondering what they did wrong to make you detest them so deeply." Of course, I exaggerated, but as I already indicated, in the heat of fury, we say things we do not mean. She never responded. Her attorney gave me a stern look. I expected nothing less. Nathan Bloodstone, according to Bill, is a good divorce attorney and a partner in Judge Marshall's former law company. It would not surprise me if Judge Marshall still had a financial stake in his former firm. The other partners would feel bound to aid him whenever possible. Bill wasn't finished. He quickly asked for a confidential meeting with a judge. He reported back to me later. I wanted the judge to know that I was bringing many complaints against him over this entire situation. He simply shrugged his shoulders. I have no idea why. He doesn't appear to care what is going to happen here. He just stated that the divorce would be final, and there was nothing I could do to halt it before a hearing on his findings was scheduled. I inquired about whether we should halt the divorce. Bill shrugged his shoulders. We can withdraw our petition, but she can still submit her own. There could be a different judge, but I believe Judge Marshall is arranging the calendar so that he is the jurist who decides the decision. I'll work late tonight to file my concerns with the Bar Association and the Judicial Review Board, requesting an expedited hearing and an injunction barring Marshall from making any decisions on your divorce. We each returned to our different workplaces. Ali had fallen off the fidelity wagon weeks before. Jason and Becca began to act out their frustrations. I enrolled them in therapy in the hopes that they might receive some assistance, but I was skeptical. They needed their mother. Now I'll be receiving visits from the excellent people at Health and Human Services. I could only hope that Ali would be honest with them. I knew I would, and I expected the children to be truthful. They didn't truly understand how to deceive. Since I now had to support Ali, I needed someplace to pay. I contacted Nathan Bloodstone to initiate the process. I was astonished to learn that he didn't want to speak with me. I hung up and called Bill. He was also astonished. None of it made sense. I was being blocked at every opportunity, even when attempting to fulfill my court-ordered tasks. Ali didn't have any checking or savings accounts that I was aware of. Her paycheck was still being placed in our joint account. I had opened a new bank account and my paycheck was being put there. I was using that new checking account to pay all of my payments, including my credit card accounts. I hadn't touched the joint account since I transferred half of the balance to the new checking account. I resolved that if Bill failed, I would transfer funds to the joint account but not utilize them. I phoned the bank and had my name removed from the account so that it could not be assumed that I was paying myself. I was losing weight due to stress. Amy Spelling had called me on the day of the hearing to tell me that Allie had returned from the hearing and had cried in her office for quite some time before calling it a day and leaving. I noticed during the hearing that Allie appeared to be lighter in weight, despite the fact that she had never been so heavy before. She was a petite individual. Except for the good judge, no one appeared to be doing particularly well. They say that the wheels of justice move slowly. I believe most of the time they grind pretty slowly. If you are an accused person attempting to mount a plausible defense, this may be beneficial. If you want your life back or just to have some concerns answered and your stress levels reduced, sluggish wheels are a curse. Life isn't like on TV, where a crime is committed and a trial is promptly held. I was shocked when Bill called me a week later. His filings must have struck a nerve. We would be discussing with the Judicial Review Board in a few days and the Bar Association in another week. At the review board, the panel of judges' only concerns were about how Judge Marshall conducted his courtroom. If I believed this would force Ali to talk to me or the kids, I was mistaken. Not surprisingly, another lawyer from Judge Marshall's former firm represented him. Bloodstone was a witness who was quizzed for an extended period of time about his perspective on Marshall's clear conflict of interest. The judges saw both the footage and my video of my visit to the Marshall house. The citation for trespassing and terrorist threats was also reviewed. A police lieutenant was also called in to testify. Bill had a delighted expression on his face when the hearing ended. He thought that at the very least Marshall would face some consequences, given this was a departure from his usual practice. The divorce was put on hold until after the Bar Association hearing. We finally learnt the reasons behind the affair. Either Richard Marshall had enemies in the Bar Association or Bill Blevins had allies there, or both. But it was clear they were hunting blood. The association hearing was a grilling. The regular rules of evidence do not appear to apply in this chamber. Bill informed me beforehand that an independent investigation was generally conducted before a hearing, but this one had been rushed. Judge Marshall was again defended by a former partner. The group even questioned Richard's financial ties with his old firm. Richard's lawyer attempted to block the request for financial details, but was denied. Richard had to admit that he was still receiving money from the firm and had voting rights over new partners. Allie was asked to testify. She claimed to having a sexual relationship with not only Lindsay and Ronnie, but also Richard. When questioned, she revealed that Richard had sex with her. She also indicated that Richard was into pleasure with pain, and that when the cops arrived to the house and I was present, she was restrained in their dungeon. Bill inquired about her views towards me and the children. Ali claimed to love me and miss the children, but Richard had threatened to hurt me or abduct the children if she attempted to leave or even contact us. She broke down as she said, "I adore and miss my children. He kept my phone from me. I had no idea if they were trying to reach me and I was unable to contact them. He also said that my workplace was monitored and that he would know if I contacted anyone from my past life. The toughest thing I've ever had to do was refrain from touching my children." When my parents brought them to the Marshall's home, when pressed, she stated that he had told her that he knew numerous people from his time as a public defender who could and would carry out his requests. Of course, Richard's attorney objected repeatedly, but the board told him to shut up because it was not a court of law. Lindsay Marshall and Ronnie Walton both testified. Of course, they gave a quite different story than Ali. They claimed that Ali solicited them for sex and that they had willingly begun an affair with her. They denied that Ali and Richard had a romantic relationship, and they certainly denied having a dungeon at their home. I was starting to become frustrated again. There was no supporting testimony for Ali. It was beginning to appear to be a case of he said, she said. Suddenly I had a thought. I left the hearing for a few minutes to make a phone call. If this works out, certain aspects of my life may begin to return to normal. The hearing dragged on. The members of the investigating board continued to interview Richard. Finally, they took a lunch break. I sat with Bill and asked him questions about the hearing. Each witness had been sworn in, and each comment was recorded both orally and by a court reporter. I didn't spot any video cameras, but I believe there may be some. Bill agreed with me. My inquiry was, is testimony admissible in a court of law? Bill didn't know for sure, but he guessed so. The majority of testimony was sealed and never made public since the disciplinary board was made up of lawyers and professionals of all stripes who were known to be fiercely protective of their peers. Following lunch, we returned to the hearing. I should inform you that the hearing was held in a state office building in the capital, which is approximately 2 hours away from our tiny town. The meeting was adjourned at around 2 p.m., with the board stating that a decision would be made very shortly. We all stood and gathered our papers. Allie took advantage of the situation and ran to my side of the room, pleading with me to take her home and away from Richard. Judge Marshall attempted to persuade her to accompany him, but another person entered the room. It was Hiram Wilson. He must have taken a helicopter or jet to get here that quickly. He promptly approached Judge Marshall. Judge, you are being arrested for kidnapping, assault, and whatever else we discover at your place. As he put the judge in handcuffs, he read him his Miranda rights. He then walked the judge out of the chamber and handed him over to a few uniformed officers. He then returned to Bill Ali within me. I introduced him to both Ali and Bill. He nodded at them before turning to me. That was an excellent tip from you, and Ali stated under oath that she had been kept away from her house and threatened with damage to you and the children. We received a search warrant for the Marshall residence. We discovered the dungeon and a plethora of video footage showing Ali being coerced and assaulted numerous times. We even uncovered video of the principals discussing what they were trying to do. We also discovered video footage from individuals whom the Marshals had seduced and then detained at their home for extended periods of time. It will take months to sort everything out and obtain the whole picture. This clarified a lot, but not all of it. We'll be interviewing Lindsay and Ronnie. I believe they will modify their story after we threaten to charge them with perjury. Lindsay cannot be forced to testify against Richard, however Ronnie can and will. I believe he paused so we could catch up. I can imagine the threat against Ali, and you will become less. When I interview the judge, I will inform him that if anything happens to you or your family, he will be the primary suspect. He looked across to Ali. We need her to have a physical examination. It can be done here at one of the hospitals, ensuring that no more evidence is lost. Then I propose that she begin therapy as soon as possible. This has been a hard ordeal for everyone, particularly her. Ali's expression was one of relaxation. She didn't say anything as we made our way to the car. Bill and I had driven together. We headed to the nearest ER. I checked Ali in. She had her own insurance because she worked full-time at her place of employment. I had my own. And when Ali had left, I had switched the youngsters to my plan. We didn't see her for over 2 hours. I was asked if I wanted to sit with her before and after I got the assault kit, but I elected not to go through the experience of being alone with a woman who had previously meant everything to me. I was scared I'd lose my cool if she said she was sorry or that I needed to forgive her since she had been attacked and held against her will. As I sat contemplating the latest disclosures, I had a regretful thought. Even if Marshall had managed to bug Ali's office, she had ample opportunity to seek assistance and notify us. She might have sent her card by messenger just as I had done. Something. No. The girl who eventually became my companion, lover, wife, and mother of my children was enticed freely and then abandoned us too willingly. I'm not sure what was promised to her at the time. Maybe I'll never know. All I knew was that Ali had willingly sold our marriage and her children down the river for some sexual pleasure. She may be having second thoughts now, but she took no effort to prevent this entire mess from unfolding. Her eagerness to go along with whatever the Marshals had planned aided their downfall, and now it was going to bite her in the butt, too. Finally, she was released from the emergency room. Appropriate to the waiting room. She stopped at the desk and handed them the insurance paperwork before approaching Bill and me. She kept her head down and only looked up when she reached us. They have finished with the exams and tests. I need to take some antibiotics for a bit. I think Richard infected me with something. I'll have to consult with our family physician about more tests. I think she was referring to HIV testing, as it could take months for her to test positive. I nodded to her and took her to the car outside while we waited. I'd made a few more phone calls. I'm hoping that with the time spent at the emergency room. Also, the driving time home confirmed that my wish had been fulfilled. There wasn't much discussion along the way. I just had questions for Allie, but since I was driving, I didn't want to hear the answers right away. It could wait a bit longer. Bill had a good idea of what I wanted from Allie because we had quietly discussed my wishes and needs while waiting. He got his orders and simply needed to travel back to town to put them into action. We headed home after dropping Bill off at his office. My parents were there with the kids, and pizza had just been delivered for dinner when we pulled in. Allie's parents came shortly after us. It was a lovely return home. The children were overjoyed and moved to tears to be back in their mother's company. They hugged her and pestered her with questions about why she had been gone so long, which she refused to directly answer. Dave began by looking at his daughter as if she were an insect that needed to be squished with a firm heel, but soon began to relax. Marcia grieved for her daughter and hugged her tightly when she could. Jason and Rebecca. She asked no questions. She was just relieved that her daughter was safe at home again. My parents indulgently watched from the sidelines, yet gave me meaningful looks. I simply shrugged my shoulders. There was ample time. Overall, it was a good evening. I guess it was excellent for the kids, but only nice for me. I was genuinely thrilled to see my children's smiles and grins. I was pleased with the billings. I was simply miserable for myself. Late in the evening, all of the parents went, leaving us alone. The children were so exhausted that they could scarcely keep their eyes open. But I knew they were frightened to fall asleep, wake up, and find out. This was only a dream. I advised Allie to put them to bed and suggested she put Jason down first. Becca would certainly require Allie to stay until she fell asleep. I also expected them to wake up in the middle of the night and attempt to join us in bed after they were both sound asleep. Allie joined me in the living room. She'd changed into shorts and a tight tank top. I had a wild notion about what more shocks she was going to give me. Allie approached and tried to sit alongside me. I couldn't understand how she could assume that just because she went home, everything was forgiven and back to normal. I shook my head, and she came to a stop and took the chair across from me. I thought you'd like to cuddle a little before we go to bed, It has been a long time since we have been together. Didn't you miss me? Of course, I've missed my closest friend, lover, wife, and the mother of my children. She smiled. Then I should be seated beside you. I've started the medication. If you still have some protection, we may start making up for the time I've been gone. That sounds appealing, but we need to make some arrangements first. What are the plans, baby? I just want to be held by you and have you make love with me. The first concerns what to do tomorrow. Today is a school day. But I was thinking we could keep the kids at home because it was late and so much had transpired this evening. Would you agree? We could all sleep in late and then go to IHOP for breakfast or lunch. She nodded. Next, I believe we should immediately find a therapist for you, and perhaps one for me. The kids had already seen one since they were so upset that you left them and made no attempt to contact them. She attempted to appear mournful, but, honey, I told you at the hearing that Richard would not let me have any contact with them. That may be true, but you went to work every day and made no attempt to contact us. Hell of messages can be sneaked out of prisons and jails. You should have been able to convey some message to us. I got the cards to you without any problems. There was no resistance from your lovers at any point. None of us were threatened or injured. You're not stupid. You may have found a safe way to let us know you were thinking of us or asked for assistance. She blushed in humiliation, but did not attempt to justify herself. We also need to find you a new lawyer. Mr. Bloodstone is a martial shill who will sell you out at a moment's notice. I set aside money for you. The good judge orders every paycheck, but your shyster would not return. Phone calls concerning what to do with the money are all deposited into our previous joint account, which is now in your name solely. She nodded, and I said, I think you should consider suing the marshals in civil court and making this whole thing as public as possible. She shakes her head. No, I do not want to expose us to ridicule. I had to laugh. Don't you believe the entire neighborhood is laughing at us right now? I told them what was going on from my point of view, and the next thing you knew, I was detained for making terrorist threats. I quote, am sure the gossip network made sure to fill in any gaps that I may have overlooked. The truth will help you assimilate back into the community. She was astonished by my revelation. You did not. Did you? How could you do this to me? To us? You were discovered in bed with two women who were preparing you for another man. I told you to leave that night because I didn't trust myself not to physically injure you. You sneaked back into the house while I was sleeping on the couch and removed some of your belongings. You made no attempts to contact us. You turned off your phone and disregarded your children. Your parents even attempted to get you to take your head out of your buttocks long enough to talk to your children, and you refused. I paused because she was silently crying. I gave it my best shot. I could not feel much pity for her. She'd basically murdered me. I went on. Yeah, you went to work every day as if nothing was happening. I would call to check on you. Amy would chat to me for a while and tell me I must be lying about our separation and your betrayal of our life together, As far as I could tell, nothing would change. You would have gone through with the divorce, assaulting me and forcing me to pay support to you when I was still a single parent. Your children were so outraged that they began to act out, and we're headed down a dark path until I can connect them with a good therapist. Even then, it was unclear whether they could put your betrayal of them behind them and move on with their lives, or whether it would permanently harm them. I only hope that having you home helps them rather than harms them. We used to be able to discuss anything and everything. When we were simply friends, we could chat and plan. If you had an issue with your boyfriend, I was the friend you needed. You became more secretive during the previous year or so, You did not tell me you had feelings for Lindsay and Ronnie. You hid your relationship until I arrived home early and caught you. Perhaps you were planning on being caught. Was this the plan all along? I'd catch you. The women would claim that I had done something bad to you and them, and I would be detained. Did I mess up the plan? She just looked distraught. I must be near to the truth. I seized on that thought. That was it, right? I was meant to go mad and assault everyone. You would have me hauled away in handcuffs. I would leave the house, and to all who cared, be whole. I would get nothing while you did anything you wanted, She nodded slowly. God damn you, I mean it. God damn you and all your lovers. I wish you all rot in hell. I got up. I needed to leave the room or I'd follow out her plan. I headed to the kitchen, fully prepared to get stinking drunk, but then remembered that I had thrown out all of the alcohol months ago because I recognized I couldn't be the example I needed to set for Jason and Becca. Allie entered the room gently as I watched. It was a dumb plan motivated by lust and the desire to fulfill a long-held ideal. I had waited a long time to be screwed by a woman, and now I was confronted with two women who desired me. They did not judge me based on my size, just as you didn't. They accepted my flaws and even acknowledged my assets, just like you did, But everything was different, new, and exhilarating. She paused and attempted to measure my reaction. She continued, saying that the prospect of someone as powerful as Richard wanting my body was intriguing. Imagine Allie Myers, a judge's love. He made me feel eager every time he glanced at me. I knew the good judge had been involved at the beginning, It was really bad that he didn't know what his 304 wife was doing. After I left here that terrible Wednesday, I was heartbroken to see you drink and shatter the glass after each drink. I was aware that I had caused significant harm, but I was also looking forward to my first encounter with Richard. But it wasn't at all. When I was imagining, he made up a boy's name for me and kept calling me that. I was chained up in their dungeon and abused at all hours of the night. During the day, I was sent to work. Richard informed me that he was going to destroy you and force you to leave so that no one would know how he treated you. You actually just gave him up? No, I wanted to come home. I was desperate. You need to believe me. I laughed at her. Sorry about that, puppy. Do not run. She stared at me oddly. What I mean is that I do not believe you. This was something you planned. You wanted it. You were prepared to falsely accuse me. You took part in it, The only surprise was that Richard was a deviant of the worst kind. After I was imprisoned, the children would have been taken to that place and subjected to who knows what type of perversion. Did you ever thought about it? She was now stunned to silence. Yeah. She did not think that one through. I hadn't either, but it made sense. I bet the final decision would have put me out on the street, and that shithead would have access to my children. The bitch is the filth. Sucker. Let them all perish in hell. I'd had enough of this for the night. It was almost 1 a.m. and I was exhausted. I had planned to share the bedroom with my former wife, Dot, but not tonight. Not now. Bill would let me off with an insanity plea. I was certain of it. I am done. Go to bed. I'll sleep on the couch again. But I warn you, if you try to leave the bedroom before the morning, I might be ready to go to jail. But our children will live with their grandparents, Dot, if you define me tonight. She walked up the stairs to the bedroom, her shoulders dropping. Her homecoming was not going as she had expected. I think she had depended on our previous sex life and how much I had always loved her physically, to know I would do anything to lure her into bed. After all, she had a lot of sex while we were separated, Dot, but I hadn't had any. She reached the bedroom, paused in wonder, and then yelled down, "Where's our bed? What did you do?" I climbed the stairs and glanced inside. I questioned if they'd have time to implement the improvements I requested. I'm glad to see it, just like old movies and television shows. There were 2 twin beds in our bedroom, Dot, instead of the queen-sized bed we'd shared for years. But rather than being close together with only a bed table in them, I had the furniture guys reconfigure the room so the beds were as far apart as possible. I hope Allie chooses the bed closest to the entryway so that the kids can quickly find her Dot. She stared at me. I shrugged my shoulders. This is only a 3-bedroom home. Jason and Becca need their separate rooms. I considered finishing a bedroom in the basement, but I was uncertain. And you arrived home today, which surprised me, so I had to make some quick alterations. I am willing to stay in this house with you so that my children can benefit from having both parents living together. I have no intention of sharing a bed with a wanton bitch who discarded her family and marriage in pursuit of a fantasy. For the foreseeable future, 2 bits. She had a very astonished expression on her face. I'm having Bill draft a post-nuptial agreement. We will give each other license to seek out sexual partners, and there will be procedures to ensure that everything is kept private, Dot. We will attend all of the kids' functions and family gatherings as a pair. We will contribute to the family's financial needs and arrange for the children's education, vacations, events, sports, and other expenses. Perhaps we will buy a larger home and relocate. But I like the neighborhood and want to stay here. I stopped, shrugging my shoulders, Dot. Whatever, this is all about the children. Except for Jason and Becca, I don't care what you desire. The arrangement will expire once Becca leaves for college, and we will be able to divorce, with me moving out. I don't necessarily want to live in this house, which holds so many memories. You won't believe how difficult it was to keep our children safe from emotional harm, Dot. When all I wanted to do was remove and destroy everything in this building that reminded me of you. I was willing to gut the place and rebuild it with a fresh floor plan if it meant erasing your memories totally. The only thing keeping me from doing it was the consequences for Jason and Becca. I was using my height to stalk over her and gaze her directly in the eyes, so she would never question my sincerity. I believe she received the message loud and clear. Please enter that bedroom and lock the door behind you now, before I lose it totally. She turned away. Sweet dreams, bitch. That was my final caustic reply. I turned and returned downstairs. Come Monday, I'd figure out how much it would cost to convert the family room into a little bedroom for me. I had no doubt that the bitch would try to seduce me if we shared a bedroom. My plan was to relocate a twin bed to the basement and let her to buy whatever she wanted. Hell, if she was covert enough, she could buy a king-sized bed and invite her lovers over on occasion. I didn't care anymore, except for how the kids might respond. I didn't even bother stripping down to my underpants. I told myself I was too exhausted, but in reality I was worried Ali might come and do anything in my vulnerable state, asleep, and then I might simply respond to her. And I didn't want her to believe I wanted her in any shape or form right now. Her betrayal was still fresh. Maybe eventually, if we first reestablish our friendship. I rapidly fell asleep even as I tried to envision my life in the coming years. So what happens after that? I had no clue. I awoke sometime later. Allie sat and gently stroked my cheek. She had tears in her eyes and was whispering how sorry she was for everything. I sympathized with her at first while trying to make sense of what was going on, but not once I regained consciousness. She may be apologetic now, but the dumb bitch is to blame for everything, Dot. She destroyed her family and harmed her children. It would take more than a weeping, "I am sorry," to make things better. I sat up and rested my head on my hands. This stopped her from touching me anymore. Without going closer, I whispered, "Go back to bed. If you keep messing with me, I will not be here in the mornings, Dot. You got to explain how you denied your children their father." She sobbed slightly louder and nodded her head. She gently got up and returned upstairs. I gazed at a clock on the wall. Yes, the big one. She just had a half. It was 4 o'clock. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep again this night. I sat in the recliner and switched on the television. Perhaps an infomercial would get my attention. I awoke again around 8 o'clock. I was stiff and aching from sitting in the recliner for a sleep. It was decent, but not a good spot to get some actual slumber, pure and straightforward. I slowly stretched and stood up. My entire body ached. It suited my mood. I put on a happy face when I saw my children. They were giggling and screeching as they bounced and played with their mother in the kitchen. They were so joyful, and I had to remember that their happiness was more important than mine right now and in the near future. Jason was now 13 years old and exhibiting more adult behavior. At times, he was just like any other adolescent. When he observed me standing there, he paused. "Dad, Mom instructed us to try to let you sleep. Why were you in the recliner? And why do you have 2 beds in your bedroom?" I should have assumed he'd noticed the shift right away. I simply shrugged my shoulders and informed him, "I'll explain later. Now, how about IHOP?" They both agreed instantly, and I told them to get dressed. I called the schools to let them know the kids will be absent today due to a family emergency. Allie ruefully admitted that she had not considered calling the schools. I could have seized this occasion to heap more coals on her head, but it wouldn't have helped. I simply shrugged my shoulders and went up to shower and change clothes. My suit would have to be sent to the cleaners after sleeping on it. Fortunately, I had a couple more due to my usual work attire. I locked the bathroom door and undressed down. I believe in shaving first, then showering, so I did just that. I also washed my teeth as they appeared fuzzy. As I focused on getting clean and ready to face the day, I heard the doorknob rattling quietly. I smiled as I considered how frustrated my wife would be. She would need to be played with by someone other than me. I started the shower by standing under the rain head and letting it soak me for a while before soaping. This was one of the few days when I could take a long shower. Usually, it was a fast wet down, soap up, and rinse before heading out to start the day. I believed the water was going to become cold when I decided I'd soaked enough and got out to dry off. I'd forgotten to carry any clothes into the restroom. Why should I, when we had a perfectly adequate bedroom and walk-in closet to dress in? I unlocked the door and was not shocked to see my wife seated on her bed, waiting for me to come out. She was naked. I had placed the towel on the rack to dry before entering the door, leaving myself entirely exposed to her. I wasn't excited to see her seated there. I paused for a heartbeat before going to the dresser for underwear and socks, then into the closet to dress while she sat on the bed. I didn't have time to look for more adornments on her body. I also took sure not to stare at her nudity as I passed by. I hurriedly put on my boxers before she could get up and try to stop me. I usually wear my shirt before my jeans, but not today. I grabbed a pair from the rack and quickly slid them on, then sat down in the designated chair to put on my socks. Finally, I put on a great t-shirt with a hilarious logo, and I was almost ready to leave. Allie stood in the doorway, still naked. "Are you not going to say anything to me?" I smiled at her. "Why are you going with us to IHOP, or are you just going to hang around here all day trying to catch a cold by not wearing clothes?" She had to try. "Isn't my nakedness giving you any ideas? Just the sight of my body used to get you ready to leave." I imagined her standing there. "Yeah, and my beloved used to keep herself only for me. That isn't happening anymore. I suppose some things change." She blushed with humiliation. "You can procrastinate all you want, but if you want to join the rest of us for breakfast, you only have 5 minutes. I came up close to her and she stepped back, allowing me to leave the closet. I smiled at the notion of coming out of the closet. That foolish concept would always make me smile. Allie turned to put her clothes back on. I departed the bedroom and went downstairs to the living room where the children were eagerly waiting. They were eager to celebrate their mother's return, but Jason wanted answers. I used the 5 minutes to explain how Allie and I had not reconciled. Jason, maybe you're old enough to comprehend Becca. I don't believe you're quite ready, but I'll always answer any questions you may have. When your mother left us, she decided to live and have sex with other people. I didn't agree to that. It has impacted our capacity to be husband and wife while not interfering with our principal jobs, to be your mom and dad. I will not sleep in the same bed as your mother while we work on our issues. We're starting out as new pals, but also as folks you've known since birth, Jason nodded. I think he understood. Becca was still bewildered, so I hugged her. Becca, it basically means that just because mom and dad don't share the same bed or even the same room doesn't mean we don't still love you. We'll both be here from now on, at least until you no longer need us, Dot. That day is far in the future. You'll be an adult by then, ready to start a new life with someone else, and mom and dad will be prepared to become grandma and grandpa. She giggled at the notion of us being white-haired grandparents and hugged me again. Allie chose that moment to descend the stairs. I didn't bother watching her descend, but the children did. They were still amazed that she was back home and kept an eye on her at all times. I was concerned that they feared she would vanish if they left her out of their sight for even a moment. Becca even mentioned that she had to bang on the bedroom door early this morning when she was seeking for us, Dot. She had discovered me easy enough, but she was practically frantic in her search for Allie. I suppose I'd have to reconsider instructing Allie to lock her door at night. We all loaded up and went to the restaurant, where we enjoyed a delicious supper. After that, I took the kids home. They were old enough to be by themselves for a short time. Allie and I then went to Bill Blevins's office to review the proposed post-nuptial agreement. Bill handed us copies while he sat with another one. It was rather basic and straightforward. The divorce proceedings would be halted if Allie and I could reach an agreement on a basic contract. The outline was rather straightforward. We would occupy the house so that Jason and Becca would have both parents and a place to live until they were old enough to make their own decisions. In our state, that is at the age of 18, I included the requirement that Becca complete high school in case she decides to drop out. For some reason, I did not demand a diploma. Also, Becca will turn 18 early in the school year, and I did not believe she needed a separate during her final critical year of secondary school. I wanted Allie to go through with her claims against Mr. Marshall. I did not want him to get away with his philandering and abuse. It was included. Ali gave me a stern glance. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, but she returned to the copy and Bill proceeded on. The next provision deals with extramarital dating. Carl has asked that you both declare this an open marriage. The section simply specifies that extramarital affairs will be kept private. It allows for open dating, but there will be no demeaning remarks or open conversations in which someone overhearing may conclude that the other spouse is being demeaned at any time. Any lover who visits the house will arrive after the children have fallen asleep and depart before they awaken. Is this understandable? Allie could not stop herself from expressing her viewpoint. I will not let Carl sleep with someone else when he could be sleeping with me. That clause is a non-starter for me. No, I will not let Carl bed some bitch. She sat there, shaking her head violently. Bill prevented me from speaking by holding his hand up. I do not comprehend your attitude. You had an affair with 2 ladies but concealed it from your husband. You then left for their place, where you repeatedly gave yourself to another male. You ignored every attempt to establish communication with your husband, children, and even your parents. You expected Carl to stay at home, raise your children, and work tirelessly to pay for everything, including court-ordered child support and maintenance. And I assume I don't date or have any other way to get sexual relief. Do I have this correct? She nodded, but still appeared morose and closed-minded. Your husband is allowing you to continue having connections with whoever you want, but he is only asking for the same permission from you. Why is it acceptable for you to cheat on him, but he is expected to remain unmarried and chaste? She did not have a response. Bill stared at me. Do I have somebody in mind to establish a sexual connection with? I shake my head. He looked at Allie. Do you have any plans to reunite with Lindsay, Ronnie, or Richard? She leaped in turn, somewhat red. I jumped in. I thought so. Are you already going to continue with someone from that group? Why do I suspect you're going to hang out with Lindsay and Ronnie? I'm supposed to sit at home and twiddle my thumbs while you do whatever pervy little things you want with the two women, hoping for leftovers the next time you come to visit Dot Wright. I assume you would never consider it cheating if it was with your girlfriends, right? Again, she wasn't sure what to say. Her expression essentially screamed everything. She. I somehow determined that it was acceptable for her to cheat, but I couldn't. Bill raised his hand again. I am not sure if you consider this coercion, but if you do not sign this agreement when it is finalized, Carl will proceed with a divorce from you. He and I had a lengthy discussion about this yesterday while waiting in the yard waiting area. I recommend you hire a lawyer to safeguard your interests here. He moved on to the next clauses. Some had to do with sharing expenses for our lifestyle. I agreed to continue paying the mortgage while Allie would be responsible for utilities and insurance. We would pay for our own cars and have complete license to replace them if necessary. I would no longer take her with me when looking for a car to drive for business or pleasure. She'd be free to do the same. The children would remain on my health insurance plan. Each of us would have a life insurance policy that was intended to settle any debts accumulated by the policyholder and due to be paid in the event of early death. There would be no more joint accounts, including credit cards, checking savings, CDs, 401ks, and any other future accounts. We would have separate mobile phone accounts, with the kids' phones on mine. I would agree not to ban any number related with Allie, whether it was hers or her parents. Specifically, Allie was free to block my number if she so wished. I had an issue with that. I provided the example. What if we don't talk and something happens to one of the kids? How do I contact you if you have blocked my number? Allie considered this and instructed Bill to change the clause to state that Allie could not restrict my phone number for any reason. There is a condition that states that if we divorce for whatever reason before Becca graduates from high school, Allie will quit the premises and give me primary custody. She would also be required to pay child support and maintenance, but the amount would be determined by an arbiter. There are no judges for us. We would also conduct routine medical checkups for any ailments and make copies of the reports available upon request. I had no reservations, but Allie wasn't happy again. This time, Bill, allow me to talk. While I doubt we will have a physical relationship, it is not out of the question. In that scenario, wouldn't you want to make certain that I'm not carrying a surprise into the bedroom? The same goes for me. I do not see a problem here. She eventually nodded. Bill recommended that any new sexual partner outside of marriage receive a medical checkup within 2 weeks, and in the case of a long-term relationship, every 6 months. During that conversation, we agreed that the remainder of the agreement had to deal with the children and their activities. Only work could prevent either of us from attending any of these events, since neither of us needed to travel for business. There shouldn't be any issues. I was mainly scared that Allie would have an assignment and ignore the kids. For the lover. She complained, but I reminded out that she had missed other events in recent months, including Jason's birthday. I can't believe Richard was so down that he wouldn't even allow her walk a few blocks or call her only kid to wish him a happy birthday. And I said it. At the end of the meeting, Allie appeared to be on the verge of tears. We got a decent start on an arrangement. She even consented to therapy. However, with a psychologist or psychiatrist rather than a therapist, she needed to completely explore her motivations for cheating and ensure that there was no physical cause for her peculiar conduct during the last several months. We left and got some takeaway for ourselves and the kids. After eating and answering questions about our session, I handed her a phone directory and instructed her to begin looking for competent experts to represent and assist her. She needed both. I even promised to let her continue with Nathan Bloodstone if he represented her and not her lover. Since the kids were so adamant on our appointment, I decided to sit them down in front of Allie and try to explain what I had done. In some aspects, marriage is similar to a commercial partnership. Not only did we agree to have children, but we also agreed on certain things when we married, such as how we would both work and contribute to the household, as well as how we would behave at home and in public, how we would treat one another, and so on. When your mother abandoned us, our pact was violated. She is now home, and we require a new arrangement. This one we're working on will allow us to properly outline how we'll live together and be your parents. It will also include sanctions for breaching the regulations that we have agreed upon. It is meant to ensure that we constantly prioritize you in our lives and never subject you to what you have had to endure in recent months. Mom regrets not being here with you and never wants to be separated from you like that again. Allie threw down the phone book and approached her children, hugging and crying with them before regaining control. Your dad is correct. I made a tremendous mistake and pledged never to abandon you all again. I don't want to be excluded from any aspect of your lives. I want to attend your birthday celebration. You go play soccer, and I want to be on the sidelines cheering you on. You have a birthday, and I want to be there to enjoy it with you. Jason, you and I need to go get you a birthday present because I wasn't there for you on your birthday. Christmas is approaching, and we will all be here to exchange gifts, see relatives, and celebrate the birth of the Savior. The rest of the day was unremarkable. Allie contacted Nathan Bloodstone, who agreed to counsel her on the post-nuptial agreement but declined to make any other representations, citing a conflict of interest with the ongoing case against Judge Marshall. He informed her that his law practice was in turmoil as a result of the hearings and that clients were leaving. Of course, the news saddened me, but not necessarily. Allie also scheduled appointments with our family physician and a psychiatrist. I also agreed to see a marriage counselor. I had no intention of gracing her bed, but perhaps we could work together to figure out why she behaved the way she did. I quote, I'm sure I was inattentive or something. And she turned to others for fulfillment. I also invited an old acquaintance in the building industry to come over and bid on a little bedroom in the basement. Hopefully it wouldn't take too long. I didn't have much space or money, so I had to get the permissions and get started. Allie didn't seem pleased. She persisted in her attempts to entice me back into the bedroom and bed. I started showering and preparing for work in the main bathroom rather than the master. I'd only go inside the bedroom to get my clothing. I even relocated my shaving tools to the main bathroom, which I had to share with my children. Allie begged me to let her sleep in the bedroom with me. She vowed to leave me alone, but I did not believe her. I believed she was quite capable of using sex to achieve her goals. Primarily, I avoided sleeping with anyone else while she was out tomcatting. I finally conceded. I chose to sleep in bed for the first time in about a week. I took out my lone pair of pajamas and put them on in the bathroom before retiring to bed. Allie almost burst with laughter. My usual sleeping apparel was nothing at all. I only slept in shorts when we had company, never wear PJs. Allie's customary sleeping clothing was simply a pair of underpants, and she continued that after the affair, just as I feared. I was awakened by the sensation of someone. I let her try to get me enthusiastic, but she found it a pointless and tedious endeavor. She knew why she had gotten her hand into my pajamas. I wore a plastic cage with little spikes inside. If I had even a sliver of excitement, pain would come my way. There was a lock on the bottom of the cage, and I was not going to tell her where she could locate a key. I believe she was angry. You scumsucker! Why do you deny yourself? I want and need you, I fired back. Why are you doing this to yourself? I told you there was no way I was going to have another sexual relationship with you in the near future. You denied me sex before being caught with them. Why is it so important to rebuild a sexual relationship with me? Is it bad for your self-esteem if I don't jump on the bed every time you enter a room? Am I making you feel less like a woman? Damn. So now you know how I've felt throughout the last many months. I sat and thought after taking care of the kids and the house on my own. How could I fall short in the love department? How could I fail to sustain your interest in me? In our life together, you had to go screw someone else. Where did I go wrong? Do you know what my last decision was? Do you? Do you want to know? She nodded slowly. I decided it was all on you. I gave you everything. I do not go out at night. I don't drink all the time. Since the night we first made love, I have avoided strange women. I don't flirt in the office. I do not dance with multiple women. This is entirely your responsibility. And you haven't even apologized for the agony you put us through. You just came over to the hearing table and everything was supposed to come up. Sunshine and roses. I was meant to be forgiven. More crucially, forgotten. Until the next time you decide to walk out on me, you might as well have stated in Bill's office that you still plan to cheat on me with Lindsay and Ronnie. Sonia agrees. You can do whatever you want. It's part of the arrangement. Damn it. She appeared shocked and speechless. I wasn't going to let her off. You have not even seen a doctor to see if your infection has cleared up? Nor have you had your first visit with a psychiatrist, Dot, and you still expect me to have sex with you, and it will all be better. Lesson number 1. Sex does not solve any problems. It simply fulfills a lust, and I don't feel any lust for you. I got up and went down to the basement family room. The sectional would have to do for tonight. Sleep quality was bad. I almost expected Allie to try something different. Finally, I woke up at 4 a.m. I walked upstairs to get my clothes ready for work, then checked her phone. Lindsay and Ronnie sent me numerous text messages describing how to reestablish their relationship with me. The implication was that they needed me on Richard's side so that he could avoid disbarment. I quote, ETM. Not sure how they could believe this unless Allie had no intention of testifying. Whatever. I wasn't going to change my opinion about this. Richard was paying. If Ali or the others incriminate themselves, it is their loss, when they were prosecuted for this. I showered early so that the kids could use the bathroom. I left early so she could get the kids ready and off to school. I had done enough for a long time, another of the joint chores Allie had assigned to me. Thinking about that has just served to fuel my rage at work. I tried to immerse myself so I wouldn't have to think about the chaos at home. Life was continuing to think that having Allie back home would improve my life, which only extended to the fact that the kids were happy again. They were doing better in class and generating fewer disruptions. The therapist genuinely stated that they didn't require much more therapy. Around 10, I called Bill and told him what I had seen on Allie's phone. He vowed to speak with Hiram Wilson. Collusion was frowned upon by the courts, and this appeared to be a conspiracy and possibly witness tampering. The Ada May subpoena the phone. It wasn't inappropriate for me to gaze at it, as it was still part of my strategy. Bill also mentioned that the final post-nuptial was almost ready. He and Bloodstone had met a few times and discussed some of the details. Bill was confident I'd be ready to sign it. Bloodstone would pressure Allie to sign it since it was fair. Since it was Friday. I emailed Allie and asked if she planned to be home on Saturday night, and she replied in the affirmative. I told her I was going out for the evening. This meant we didn't need a babysitter. If she had plans for tonight, I'd prepay the favor. I didn't have a specific plan. Perhaps a movie and a quiet pint and burger at the bar. She hadn't said that she needed me to watch the kids tonight, so I wasn't surprised when I got home to see that she was suddenly leaving. I just nodded and told her the postnuptial agreement was ready to be signed. I asked if she and I could meet at Bill's office on Monday. I hoped Bloodstone could also attend. She simply nodded and continued to prepare to go out in front of me. We were conversing in the bedroom, and the kids couldn't hear us unless we yelled. I had no intention of doing so. I was attempting to keep things dispassionate. I asked who she was going out with. She abruptly rose up in response to my question. I am going out with Lindsay and Ronnie. If you need to know, this is not a violation of your terrible agreement. I nodded my head. No, it is not. But I'll warn you, they have a different version of what happened than you do. Then they may try to persuade you to change your tale. If you testify differently than at the hearing, the Ada may charge you with perjury followed by witness tampering. I believe both are felonies. Also, if you visit the Marshall house, Ada may see this as witness tampering. She seems to dislike the nice judge for some reason. I let that little piece of information sink in. Perhaps you should stay in a motel for tonight. I doubt Ronnie or Lindsay would want to come here with me in the house, so a motel could be a better option for you. She fired back. You presume I'll have sex with them. You don't think highly of me anymore, do you? I shake my head. Look at the facts. You cheated on me without my knowledge or permission with impunity. You even screwed them or had them screw you in our marriage bed. I approved this, and it is permitted under the terms of the agreement we would sign. I have every intention of signing it on Monday. Hell, if it hadn't been difficult for me to go to Bill's office today, I would have already signed and notarized it. I know you haven't had any sex since you got home and are probably really excited, so go and have some fun. She tries to get me back on board. Look, I'm standing naked and ready. Screw me now, and I'm not going out tonight. The girls can just play together. Thank you, Cal. Touch me and screw me. I turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving no comment. A minute later, I heard swearing and strong thumps. Something was being thrown at the bedroom wall. A few minutes later, Allie rushed out of the house. I wondered if she wore her thong before putting on a basic t-shirt and jeans. She didn't appear to be going on a date with her lovers. I smiled to myself. Maybe she didn't have to tempt her boyfriends anymore. Amused. Oh, where has the romance gone? I had an unremarkable evening with the children. Because I did not appear concerned about Allie's absence, they appeared soothed and unconcerned that Mom was not present. They could stay up a little later because it was a Friday. Allie arrived home about 10 and joined us in the living room. I arched an eyebrow at her, but she merely shrugged and got back to the board game we were playing on Saturday. A cop arrived and issued Allie a search warrant for her cell phone. She wasn't happy. I hoped this meant she hadn't removed any of the messages I'd seen. After he departed, she retreated to the bedroom for a few moments before rejoining us. Because it was late fall, it was chilly outside, yet we all went out and raked leaves for a bit. It kept us warm, and the kids got into a leaf-tossing contest, so all the leaves were quickly stretched out again. It was a nice family outing. I know Ali was hesitant to let me go out that evening. I didn't quarrel with her or make any comments. I just got ready for my first evening as an unattached male since early college. I was not looking forward to it. Nope. Not like I'd been there in college. With each outing, I hoped to meet my true love. Now all I was looking for was a prospective companion. I did see the most recent blockbuster action film, and I promised myself that the next time, I'd bring Jason along. He liked these types of movies. After that, I went out for a lonely meal, then stopped at the local pub to play a few games of pool while drinking a beer. While I was there, a girl approached me and asked if I was lonely. She looked at my ring finger and noticed the band I was still wearing. I assumed she was a lady of the evening, but suggested she seat next to me. If nothing else, I could talk to a woman. She was attractive, but seemed a touch jaded. I suppose it was to be anticipated given her line of work. She named herself Crystal, although I'd wager it was a fictitious name. We talked in generalities for a bit as I drank a beer and she worked on a glass of wine. I gave her a shortened version of why I was out. She shook her head and made the usual remarks about how Allie was an idiot who didn't deserve me. How could I not agree? I had attracted a beautiful woman approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall with light brown hair, green eyes, and a good figure. I wasn't a naive school kid. I was aware that Crystal was searching for someone to pay her for her business, but I wasn't buying. I wasn't that hard up yet. We spoke for nearly an hour before she received a phone call and had to go. Her chat was exactly what I needed. For a little period, it appeared like my life was in order. Simply sitting and talking with a woman without any expectations boosted my self-esteem significantly. I was whistling when I entered the house. It was after 11 p.m. and the children were most likely asleep. Allie was waiting and she pounced. "Did you screw someone? Are you happy right now? Are you going to tell me the specifics? To watch as I fall apart, is that your intention?" She broke down and started crying. She seemed saddened. I waited for her to regain control. She finally stopped sobbing and sat there, dejected. I sat across from her. "Why does this bother you so much? After all, do you intend to put me in jail on fabricated charges and take me to the cleaners while you play with your little friends? You denied me sex, not only when visiting the Marshalls but also previously. What's the deal?" She appeared bewildered. "I truly don't know. Intellectually, I understand that I cheated on you and that we agreed to have sex outside of marriage, but I always had the feeling you'd be there when I got home and we'd be together again. I quote am having difficulties accepting that you would have sex with someone else. I know, is there a double standard? But this is how I feel. It is foolish of me to expect you to forgive me, but I don't think I can forgive you for screwing another lady." She paused and considered it. "I suppose it's also because I want to make love with you. But you're constantly saying no to me. I am attempting to repair our relationship and be the mother, wife, and lover you deserve. However, you refuse to be my wife and lover. I know it's my fault, but I'm trying while you're not. I abandoned our friendship and shattered your affection. But I'm trying to make apologies. But you slam the door in my face at every step. If you were attempting to ensure that we didn't survive as a pair, you did a good job." What she was saying was correct. All of it. She maintained a double standard. She intended to continue with those who attempted to ruin us. She desired freedom to do anything she pleased. She also wanted me to simply wait quietly and accept my duty. She also did not want me to have as much sex as she did and would have. She was likewise trying to make atonement, but not by paying a penalty. She still had no idea what she had done to us and to me. This is a question, please. Did you engage in sex with your pals last night? No, I didn't. I got them to chat and recorded the conversation. The cops should have it, as they picked up my phone today. They acknowledged that they intend to end our marriage and make me a sex slave. Jason and Becca were also part of the scheme. I will never have anything to do with them again. I had never considered it. I was instantly sick to my stomach. My palms became clammy, and bile surged in my throat. Those folks were some of the worst predators I could imagine, and we had shared meals with him on several times. There are almost too many to count. I started shaking and needed to sit down. This week, I had spent so much time torturing Ali and attempting to make her feel as bad as I had in the previous months that I had lost sight of the ultimate goal, which was my children's safety and well-being. The marshals are backed into a corner. They may decide to escalate their crimes, kidnapping my children and torturing them in order to get back at me and punish me for interfering with their objectives. After all, Richard was accused with many felonies and had been removed from the bench. His law firm was failing, and so was his additional income. His license was about to be restricted at the very least. His wife was apparently having problems at work, and being a religiously affiliated nursing facility made it difficult to condone her actions. Only Ronnie seemed unfazed professionally as the situation became public. I placed my face in my hands. How could I have been so stupid? When cornered or wounded, animals will turn and attack whatever is irritating them. I was probably toward the top of the list of tormentors. All of this going out and prodding Ali's nose with the hope that my ashes would be hauled by another girl was driving us apart and giving our adversaries a better chance of injuring us, and perhaps even damaging our children. I finally leaned back and rested my head on the back of the chair. As I reflected on our future, I felt completely exhausted. I needed to start someplace. So I told Ali what happened this evening. I went to a movie all by myself. Then I went to Jesse's club for dinner and a few beers. While I sat alone, I wondered if that was my future. To simply accomplish everything alone or with the children. I was contacted by a girl named Crystal. It was clear that she was a hooker, but we sat and talked for nearly an hour before she got a phone call and left. Then I returned home. I did not meet any odd women, and I did not have any sex with any woman. I halted to look Ali in the eyes. I apologize for continuing to punish you right now. We must call a truce and do what is best for the children and their safety. We need a strategy to protect the children. I feel that the closer the marshals come to losing everything, the more danger they will encounter. They will become desperate and seek to harm us. The more desperate they are, the more harm they want to wreak on whomever they choose as an enemy. We are the ones who knocked them off their tiny pedestal. Therefore, they will want to injure us the most. Ali, of course, had not considered that. She had gone into the romance solely for the purpose of receiving great sexual pleasure from the couple, and she had come under the judge's thumb. She had believed him when he threatened me and the children, so she made no attempt to flee him until the hearing. Now she was meeting with Lindsay and Ronnie again, thinking they were her friends rather than just looking out for their own best interests. The light started to dawn on her. She gasped and attempted to deny it. No, they cannot be so heartless. She shakes her head. I simply cannot trust my buddies. She paused as she considered what had happened to her. Let's start the truce right now. Let's go to bed, and tomorrow we'll start planning how to keep everyone safe. I am not committing to let you back into my bed, but I won't keep attempting to rub your face in any extracurricular activities I've planned for the near future. I won't go out looking for weird women. She offered me a slight smile. I suppose she had to believe that this was an acceptable surrender. Unfortunately for her, I still planned to assign the post-nuptial agreement on Monday for the first time in months. I took her hand and brought her into our bedroom. She pulled off her clothing and slipped into her bed. I went into the bathroom, put on my cage and boxers, and then returned to my bed. I could see Ali was disappointed yet again. I suppose she assumed I was eager after not getting my rocks off with a pickup date. I wasn't ready to screw my wife yet. I switched out the light, crawled into my bed, and tried to sleep. It was difficult to think about how vulnerable our children, and by extension, Allie and I, were. I did not own a gun. Ali did not know how to shoot. The children attend a public school, and we all know how insecure they can be. I had no idea if the grade school or middle school had a resource officer present at all times. I knew the high school did, but that was no consolation. I was still battling with my thoughts and ideas when Allie got into the bed next me and held me from behind. Just like our first night so many years ago, I turned to face her, and we were both fast asleep again. When I awoke in the morning, I was terrified I wouldn't be able to stand up straight. Sleeping as a pair on a small bed wasn't so bad when I was a college student, but now I was in my mid-30s and a little less adaptable. My knees and back felt stiff. I sat up carefully and proceeded to the restroom to remove the cage and relieve myself. Yeah, I could have pissed through the aperture, but I needed some relief, and it was my idea to put the device on so I wouldn't have to keep it on if I didn't want to. The relief I felt after taking the cage off was profound. I stood there looking at my wife, thinking about how much I loved her. I reflected on all the good times we had shared. I reflected on the 2 lives we had brought into the world. I then reflected on the last few months when I was forced to be a single parent, without a companion, lover, or friend. I should just screw the bitch. Perhaps that would relieve the agony. No, it would not, because it is what she desired. She believed that sex would bring us back together. We needed to protect our children. But sex was not going to solve our problems. Just then, I heard the children outside in the hallway. I turned around, slipped off my sleep boxers, and dressed quickly so I could help the kids eat breakfast. It was likely going to be a cold breakfast day. Allie just lay there, watching me leave the bedroom. I suppose she was still trying to get me on her side. I shrugged and went downstairs. I soon had the kids fed and ready to spend the Sunday with them. And I'm curious about the religious service that started late. We started attending more frequently after Allie left us high and dry. I think I needed some consolation, but I also wanted Jason and Becca to see if they could find any comfort there as well. I don't think it benefited them then, but I thought they would be grateful for their mother's return. After church, I informed the pastor that Allie had returned home and that she might attend with us in the future. He was thrilled and offered help. At home, I told Allie about my tentative plan to assist protect the children. I was about to swear out a protection order against Lindsay, Richard Marshall, and Ronnie Walton to keep them away from the children. I would also stop and discuss the children's safety with school administrators. Then we'd acquire a shotgun for home defense because Allie could shoot it with minimal aim or training. I would look at getting my concealed carry permit and then purchasing a weapon to carry with me. Allie wasn't thrilled with the idea of having a pistol or 2 in the house, but she agreed that we needed to be able to protect ourselves, especially our children. The idea of either of our children in the clutches of those creatures was terrifying. On Monday, I took the kids to school and met with the principals to address their safety. Both principals were first skeptical of my story, but eventually understood that I held them personally accountable if either of my children was harmed. In fact, they all turned pale as I towered over them at their desks and explained in no uncertain terms what I meant by holding them responsible. It surprised me that the cops were not at my office when I arrived. I then went through the morning briefings and meetings, dealing with a minor problem that always seemed to arise before calling Hiram and considering carrying a firearm. He had listened to the audio recording and read all of the messages on Ali's phone before returning it to her. He agreed that the marshals constituted a physical threat to all of us. He told me to make sure Bill got the protection order in place as soon as possible, and I assured him I'd phone him next. Bill received the call quickly and was on his way to processing the order. I then visited the local gun shop to look at firearms. What a selection to look through. Large firearms, tiny guns, rifles, shotguns, and everything in between. I'd never hunted or been much of an outdoorsman, so the variety of options baffled me. Finally, I just told the salesman what I needed a gun for. He looked about and then took out a little Kimber 9mm pistol. It may be readily concealed under a polo shirt or jacket while still providing enough firepower to stop an attacker. He chuckled and said it was what the old-timers called a belly gun, You walk up to the guy you don't like, stick it into his belly, and pull the trigger. That way, you know where the bullet will go. A gun with this small A barrel is not particularly accurate. After 5 to 10 feet, I figured that this rifle would be ideal for a shotgun. He advised keeping away from ones designed for hunting. The barrel would be too long for close quarters, limiting you to just 3 shots. He suggested a tactical model. It was more expensive, but it possessed a folding stock and a shorter barrel dot. It is simply lawful and can be addressed within the home. I shrugged my shoulders in agreement. Of course, I couldn't take the guns with me immediately. Nope. I had to wait for the minimum waiting period while my background was checked and I was found to be of sound mind. I was trying to remain watchful while I commuted to work and picked up the kids' dot. There was no clear attempt to contact us during the next week or so. That ended one afternoon. I received a call from the school. The school official stated that my parents attempted to visit with the students. I instantly phoned my mother, and they had been home all day. Dad had to work, and they weren't coming down till the weekend dot. It was just how I expected. I called the school back and went straight there. When I arrived, Becca was waiting in the principal's office. She didn't appear concerned, just puzzled as to why she was at the office. After all, she'd done nothing wrong. I gave her a hug. Allie arrived a few minutes later and we sat down with the principal to address the situation. I want you both to know that as soon as the couple was denied access to the school, I called the police. They drove away quickly, however, someone on the staff did obtain a license plate number from their vehicle. I suppose I should back up and give you all the details first. Mr. Myers, I would like to apologize. When you came in last week and told us what could happen, I was doubtful. I understand that divorces and other occurrences that harm relationships require us to be constantly watchful, but I had never faced a threat from anybody other than family, so I was hesitant to agree with you. Then today, at midday, a couple arrived and introduced themselves as Becca's grandparents. Normally, we would not require identification, but because they were using Rebecca's full name, and I know you prefer that we call her Becca, my alarm bells went out. I couldn't imagine her grandparents calling her by her entire name unless you did. Both members of the marriage appeared to be under the age of 40. That also made me worried. Finally, I asked them for your phone number so that I could call and confirm their ID, and they left. Becca never saw them at any point. They made no threats at any point. Thus, no one appears to have been affected by this. I congratulated her and her colleagues for their alertness and praised them for preventing an abduction. I assume this was simply a warning. My children would now receive a notification informing them that they were vulnerable. It came that afternoon after we had all returned home. My phone switched off, and the message block number appeared on the screen. It was a short message, Dot. We almost got your daughter today. We will not try the school again. You understand what you need to do. He hung up. I phoned Hiram Wilson, who immediately dispatched a patrolman to retrieve my phone. We didn't have any recorded evidence, but his IT team might be able to hunt down the phone and get a number or an idea of its location over the next few weeks. I keep the shotgun in the car while driving the kids to and from school. I also had the pistol, but I needed to finish the final few sessions of the concealed carry course. There were no issues. Next came Becca's birthday. We wanted to go all out now that Allie was home again, but we were also anxious about security. Finally, we decided to hold her party but engage a professional security company to ensure the children's safety. Hiram also demanded that he be included on the guest list and that we notify the neighbors ahead of time that security would be there. Tight. Fortunately, her birthday was not ruined. Her mother was home, and I was the responsible father. Yes, the camera was hidden beneath my shirt in a little holster on the small of my back. I was also taking self-defense classes at the Y, in case I lost my gun. The classes were helping me become in better shape, if nothing else. Allie and I also went to a gun range once a week to fire some rounds at targets. We practiced with both shotguns and pistols. When Richard's next hearing was approaching, the world turned upside down once more. The day before the hearing, Richard and Lindsay's 2 children told a reporter that they were willing to testify against their parents if Ada requested it. It wasn't explicitly stated in the news reports, but the implication was that Richard had molested his own children before they fled to college and had not returned home since there wasn't a hearing in the morning. Richard was discovered hanging from a ceiling joist in his garage the following morning. Hiram broke protocol by showing Richard's final note, which was discovered next to the body. It was rambling, but he blamed me for all of his problems, and he knew he was going to be convicted and lose everything. He hoped Lindsay would be able to survive the entire ordeal. The police department was willing to call it a suicide, despite the fact that there was no visible way he could have climbed high enough to tie off the rope and then fallen to his death. There was no chair, stand, or stepladder nearby that he could have used. I am convinced that someone he owed something to decided that Richard was a liability who needed to be permanently dealt with. There was no telling what secrets he might have revealed to the DA to shorten his sentence. Even Hiram acknowledged that this was a suspicious ending, but he could not overrule the DA Lindsay decided to sell and leave. I don't know if Ronnie went with her. I only wish them well. Suddenly, there appeared to be no threat in our lives. It was almost anticlimactic. Here I was, ready to defend my family against all comers, when suddenly there were no wolves approaching us. It was difficult not to become paranoid and look for threats in every comment or even the looks of friends and strangers. I put the shotgun away and locked the pistol in a biometric vault that only I could access. The kids were unaware of the danger to their lives, and Allie and I were relieved that nothing had happened to alter their perception of the world. They could continue to use social media, participate in sports, attend school, and socialize with their co-workers. One morning I received a surprise visitor. It was a well-known local crime lord. I will not mention his name. He was actually in my office when I arrived. He stepped in and approached me. I was so surprised that I forgot I could have bolted from the office, even though I was just inside the door. "Mr. Myers, you don't know me, so I won't approach you again. I'm sorry to hear about your difficulties with the late Judge Marshall. Some of my colleagues were responsible for the attempt to see your daughter at her school. There was also a phone call afterwards. I want you to know that they will not contact you ever again. When I learned the truth about the judge, I severed all contact with him. I appreciate your time." With that, he passed me and left the office. I admit I collapsed in my chair. This man was known to have no regard for anyone or anything in here. He had just assured me that I had nothing to fear. My hands shook as I attempted to get a drink of water because my mouth was as dry as the dessert. My secretary arrived a few minutes later and had to inquire about my health, as I still appeared pale. I believe she was surprised by my smile and subsequent assurances that everything was fine. Home life with Allie and the children settled into a routine. I moved a twin bed down to the basement bedroom, which had been finished. Allie was displeased, but the psychiatrist she was seeing convinced her that she still had some serious issues to deal with. Most nights, I slept in the basement bedroom, but I did not lock the door. I kept the twin bed because it was uncomfortable for two people. She replaced the other one in the master bedroom with a king-size bed, but I refused to accompany her there. She was still trying to get me back. We went through some marriage counseling sessions, but they didn't do much for me. The counselor was more concerned with my shortcomings than with the infidelity. She loftily asserted that something in our relationship must have compelled Allie to seek solace in the embrace of her other lovers. Of course, I was also to blame. I wasn't willing to give Allie the freedom to discover herself sexually, and I must be some kind of old-fashioned, bigoted male who doesn't live in the 21st century. Yada yada. After roughly the second encounter with that fruitcake, I didn't return. I'm not sure how Allie listened to her physician and this counselor without suffering a mental breakdown from the conflicting messages. I went on infrequent dates. I wasn't searching for a long-term relationship because Becca was still a few years away from graduating from high school, and I quickly realized that any woman who would attach herself to me while I was still married to Allie was probably just as crazy as Allie. I quote, "Am not sure if Allie had sex outside of the house. On rare occasions, she would ask me to stay with the kids while she went out. When she did, she dressed decently, but not all that provocatively. I would get the kids down at their typically time and then head for the basement. I never stayed up to see whether she brought someone else home to her king-size bed when I would get up in the morning. There was no indication that anyone had been there, yet this was part of our arrangement. I'm sure she wondered if I ever had sex after a date, too. And certainly I occasionally got lucky. It was typically okay sex. But for a guy, any sex is excellent sex. Since I wasn't searching for a relationship, there were not many repeat sessions. We attended all functions that even vaguely involved the children. We sat together during Becca's choir and theater performances. We sat together for all of Jason's football and basketball games, even though he wasn't first string. We were drawn in because he was dressed appropriately. We applauded, yelled, and screamed as the situation required. We even hugged when one or the other did something that made us very proud. Overall, we enjoyed our time with the children. We may discuss their dreams and goals. We assisted them in determining which college would best suit their careers, first with Jason, and then with Becca. Jason wanted to study robotics and ended up in a university 400 miles away. We began to only see him on major holidays and semester breaks. He even began taking summer classes in order to graduate earlier. 2 years later, Becca was about to graduate. She had turned 18 and was ready to begin her new chapter of life. She had settled on nursing as a profession and was even discussing advanced practice nursing. Her school was a little closer at 100 miles, but we wouldn't see her because she was only planned to return home at the same time as Jason. She had grown up and no longer needed her old parents. It was time for me to move out, the day Becca left for college. I know Allie didn't want me to, but the love we shared so many years ago had died and would not return. We had lived in a house as acquaintances and parents, and now the parenting was complete. Furthermore, I had searched for a long time and finally discovered where Lindsay Marshall and Ronnie Walton had settled. They still deserved some punishment for what they had done to me. I'd applied to a firm near where they lived and was employed. I have not told the kids or Allie yet. I believe Jason had worked out what I was going to do. In general terms concerning his mother. That was why he didn't come home as much. He was cutting ties. I hope we can form some sort of relationship after the final split. Becca was now a mature, confident young woman. She seemed a little melancholy around me, but generally she was accepting the perceived shift. We didn't need to talk about it. She knew based on how Allie and I had been around each other since the affair. We no longer held hands, kissed in front of them, or demonstrated any public affection for one another. We were cordial and occasionally pleasant, but not as we had been before the incident. Becca had had her fair number of boyfriends and knew how individuals should act while in love. She had also noticed her mother gazing at me in a way that indicated she wanted us to be the pair we had been before, but she had never seen me look at Allie in the same way. Finally, it was time for her to leave. She packed and repacked. She even packed every keepsake in her room into boxes for storage. I knew she didn't intend to return to this place when she came to see her mother again. I'm not sure if Allie comprehended the gravity of Becca's departure. Her brilliance occasionally interfered with common sense. The agreement was now considered null and void. I believe Allie has come to trust that we will work on our relationship and heal it. Becca had only been gone for 15 minutes when a stranger approached us on the pavement in front of the house. He asked for our names, and when Allie told him hers, he handed her the paperwork and said she was served. The expression on Ali's face was priceless. She stuttered a little and attempted to ask what was going on. I suppose I needed to lay it out for her. When I let you back into the house, we struck an agreement. That arrangement was to ensure that we were available for the children, and we were. We previously had an open marriage, which allowed you and me to date and have sex with whomever we wanted. I never asked if you were dating since it didn't matter anymore. I only wanted to ensure that our children were not abused by any paramour. Aside from that, I didn't care. Now that the kids have left, we are no longer needed. I'm scared that my reluctance to forgive you and continue our normal married life has impacted their bond with us. I don't expect them to return home for a visit anytime soon. And now that our arrangement is complete, I'm suing for divorce and moving away. I have some unfinished business to attend to. Right on time. A moving van drove into the driveway. The men had already received their orders. They exited the truck and began grabbing the stuff I had boxed while Allie was at work. There wasn't much to get. I had moved several things earlier. It was already on its way to my new house. Allie still seemed perplexed. I merely shook my head, turned to my car, and got inside. I rolled up the window and backed out of the driveway. It would dawn on her in a short while. I called her parents and asked them to come and be with her as she grieved over something that had died many years before. I quote, admit that I still cared about Allie on some degree. She had been a friend, lover, wife, and mother to my children for many years. I hated to think about it, but that individual was no longer with us. We only had the kids in common, and they no longer needed us as parents. We would occasionally get together for family functions. I despised it, but I had no plans to visit Allie's parents at any moment. They were lovely people, but Allie needed their affection and perhaps their acceptance. Any relationship with me would undermine and interfere with that love. I'd rented a little apartment near my new workplace. I promptly had it fixed. However, it was not a pleasant and welcoming environment. I had gone despite the fact that Allie and I were no longer in love. The house had been a home when the children were present. I suppose I should just start a new life with a new woman. However, Lindsay and Ronnie still needed to be punished for their actions. Every evening when I ended work, I gathered information about the bitches. Lindsay had recently been promoted to vice president of a tiny community hospital, I learned. Ronnie was working as a night nurse at another hospital a few miles away, while Lindsay worked during the day. I wondered about their love lives. I didn't really care. All I wanted to know was if they were still together. I accompanied Lindsay home one afternoon. She lived in an affluent area in a spacious home. I guess she needs the status symbol. I chose a quiet spot to park and waited to see whether Ronnie was also living there. About a half hour later, I noticed her exit the garage and proceed in the opposite direction. I imagined she had to be at work at 6 p.m., given where she lived. I then started gathering more information. There were a few homes for sale in the vicinity, so I contacted a realtor and told her about my desire to buy a good home for when my wife and children relocated. As soon as my home in our former hometown sold, I did not tell her where my fake family resided. She showed me every home in the area, promoting the location, local schools, parks, and other facilities, as well as the people's warmth. After inspecting the homes, I walked around the neighborhood, telling the same tale at each house I stopped at to get to know the residents a little better. One of my questions to each was how he or she felt about near neighbors and whether there was any drug use in the neighborhood. I expanded my fabricated account by complaining about drug use in my former community, which made me scared to let my children play outside. Every person I spoke with listened to my narrative and provided me dirt on every neighbor. It was a typical upper-middle-class neighborhood. There were a few inebriated residents. At times, someone would whip out a bag of pot at an adult-only party. Some of the inmates were rumored to be addicted to prescription drugs, while others used other narcotics on a regular basis. I didn't ask explicitly about Lindsay Marshall or Ronnie Walton. The gossipy neighbors were all too eager to discuss what was going on in the Marshall and Walton household, but there wasn't much dirt on the couple. Lindsay and Ronnie remained to themselves the majority of the time. They rarely hosted, and only went to the occasional neighborhood gathering without Richard as their leader. It seems like they didn't need to find anyone for sex anymore. That did not make me feel any better about what they had done to me and my family years ago. These middle-aged people needed to feel anguish for what they had done. A few evenings later, I went to scout the house. I saw no evidence of an electronic surveillance system, but there could have been one. There weren't any pets to contend with. I sat back and thought about plants. Maybe, but I didn't know. Crowbar or bat to the knees might be effective. All I had to do was ring the doorbell late one night, and it would be over quickly. I came up with a plan that required no firearms. I merely needed to enter the house undetected. When I looked at the patio door, I noticed a paw lock on it. One day, Ronnie was resting out in the sun and appeared to fall asleep. I sneaked up to the open patio door, taped the lock open, and then slipped away. That night, after Ronnie had left for work and Lindsay had retired for the night, I checked and the door slipped silently open. I removed the tape as I entered. I snuck up the stairs and left a little device on the main floor. After determining which bedroom Lindsay was in, I proceeded down the corridor in the dark and waited. I scouted the hallway and discovered a light switch near the top of the stairs. The dark hallway was the ideal location for what I was looking for. When I was certain I couldn't be identified, I put on an old Halloween mask that resembled Jimmy Carter. I triggered the device remotely. I captured the sounds of glass breaking and heavy footfall, and the increased sound echoed around the peaceful house. The sounds were on a loop and continued until the bedroom light came on. Lindsay poked her head out the door and hesitantly shouted out, "Is anybody there?" I kept the sounds going for a few more minutes till she emerged into the hallway and approached the light switch. I turned off the sounds, and the silence was filled only with her breathing. "Is anybody there?" she repeated as she turned on the light switch. I raced towards her, shouting, "Payback is horrible, you heathen bitch!" She shrieked and fell down the steps when she saw me dressed in all black and wearing that strange mask. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she remained motionless. I turned off the light and used a pen light to guide me back down the stairs to grab my small sound gadget. I checked Lindsay. She lay asleep, with a massive bruise on the back of her skull. She was breathing normally and had a healthy pulse. I left her there and exited through the patio door, making sure it was closed. The next day's newspaper made no mention of any attack. I looked about the house every now and then for approximately a month. Lindsay, quote, "S automobile was always there." Ronnie continued to work as usual. After the month was up, some building occurred, and a ramp was created from the driveway to the front entrance. A couple of days later, I saw Lindsay arrive in a wheelchair van, with Ronnie bringing her up the ramp to the house. Lindsay must have injured her back in the fall, as I had hoped. She is now facing the consequences of her actions. Her movement was impaired. I would be astonished if Ronnie remained with her. If she did, they would no longer have much physical enjoyment together. Lindsay would probably not experience sexual feelings if her body was out of order. I can now focus on myself. Life carries on. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, write a comment below with your thoughts on what transpired.